commit our ways into your hands. You direct our paths, so we commit this gathering into your hands. And we pray that it will be successful as we desired. In Jesus' name, amen. Once again, welcome, Honorable Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Honorable Sechimen Sabonsu, the representative of the Minority Leader, Honorable Kofi Amaboa, the Chairperson of the NCCE, Madam Kathleen Adi, and all others present from ACET and from other walks of life. I would like to invite the Chief Director of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs to give us a welcome address, Dr. Evans Adbedako. Please give a round of applause as he comes.
The Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Leader of Government Business, Majority Leader of Ghana's Parliament, Honorable Ama Kofi Boah, the Deputy Minority Leader, we are happy to have you. Chair of the National Commission for Civic Education, Ms. Kathleen Adi. You can see the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor N.S. Aite. I served under him and we used to be called Aite Powers. The former Chairman of the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee of Ghana's Parliament, the 7th Parliament. The Chairman of the National Media Commission, distinguished invited technical people, participants, and let me also recognize the Dean of the University of Ghana Law School, Professor Raymond Atuguba. We call him Ray. Distinguished media professionals, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure and with humility that I welcome all of us to the Moving Peak Hotel this morning. We treasure your presence very much, and we appreciate the fact that you responded to our call. A firm commitment that we do not take this gesture for granted at all. Distinguished participants, in the ministry's engagement with stakeholders before 2021, it became apparent that the 1992 Constitution needed some surgical operation. Various speakers and participants at several fora organized by the ministry had drawn attention to several inconsistencies, nebulous, and in some cases, irreconcilable provisions and gray areas. And the consensus was that the review of the Constitution had literally become an imperative. The ministry has also observed with interest the plethora of lectures, discussions, engagements, consultations with the constitutional review as a critical focus. We, for instance, cite the constitutional review activities of the NCCE, the CDD, IDEC, IEA, the UPSA Law School, University of Ghana Law School, KNUST Law School, among others, which to us attests to our collective interest to see either a change in the actor behavior of our people to reinvigorate the functioning of our Constitution, or the reconfiguration of the institutional architecture of the Constitution to make it much more functional, or both. Through the minister, the ministry consistently indicated to the public the urgent need to revisit the 1992 Constitution with a view to engendering the critical debate leading to a possible review or total overhaul. It is against this background that constitutional review has been on the systemic and institutional agenda of the ministry since 2017. The ministry was also mindful of the review exercise, which was started in 2010, culminating ultimately in a release of report December 20, 2011. Our position has been that the CRC report provides very useful reference point for any review exercise that is to be taken. We also contend that 31 years in the life of a constitution provides ample time for a review to make the document not only a developmental instrument, but also a living one. The postponement of the ministry's planned constitutional review conference in 2021 which was largely occasioned by development in Parliament, which threatened effective participation of both the NDC and MPP and other critical stakeholders, and had the potential to undermine the bipartisanship approach that the ministry was seeking. The ministry has since 2021 or 2021 kept the constitutional review program on the agenda as a top priority of the minister, and has worked assiduously to be much more consultative with a view to building consensus and promoting inclusivity and the needed buy-in, and enhance the quality of the proposals that will be crafted. In a public lecture at KNUST in Kumasi, July 12, 2022, our minister, under the theme, under the topic Constitutional Review, the Perspective of a Legislator, examined the Constitution, the 1992 Constitution, through the prism of a legislator, and outlined several areas that impede the smooth functioning of the state and hinder both governance and economic transformation. And that lecture concluded succinctly that our Constitution must be overhauled. He subsequently participated in several constitutional review lecture series at University of Ghana, UPSA, IEA, among others. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this consultative technical meeting, in partnership with NCC and collaboration with African Center for Economic Transformation under the general rubric of Compact, and includes cooperation with IEA, CDD, and IDEC, is part of our consensus building effort, is seeking to harness ideas and draw on each other's strength to underpin the constitutional review process. In this consultation, we seek two objectives. What roadmap will be feasible and acceptable to the constitutional review process? And we ask critical questions of what and why. And then what should be the appropriate plan for review of the Constitution? And how do we roll out the plan or the roadmap, for instance? To achieve this, the presentations today will by and large set the tone, provoke frank, open, candid, and reflective discussions among participants. And we are confident that our commitment will yield the required dividend so it does not become an exercise in futility. So once again, let me welcome all of us to this hall, and we pray that we succeed in this arduous yet noble venture. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Doc, for the succinct presentation. It was shorter than I expected. Normally we're a 2-hour lecture, after which there'll be question and answer. I missed a few names that were present. I'm sorry. I need to go back to it. In no particular order, I'd like to acknowledge Madam Mavis Owusu-Jemfi. She's the EVP of ASET, and she's here representing Dr. K.Y. Amwako, the former and the president of ASET. Mavis, you're welcome. And then I'll try, but I'm sure many of you know each other, but just for the proper thing to be done, I would like to acknowledge Professor Raymond Atuguba. The next is Yao Bodwa Ebuafo. Next one, we have John Asafoje and Ivo Ajimandia. We have Professor Ernest Aite. We have the Deputy Minority Leader, Emmanuel Amakofibua. I mentioned him earlier. We have Mr. David Ofosudote and Honorable Benab Dalabanda. We have Honorable Bernard Ahiafo also here. I hope I haven't missed anyone out. And then we have staff from Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, both the ministry and then the technical unit in this place. At this point, the next item on our agenda is to have the remarks by the chairperson of the NCC. Madam Kathleen, please.
Thank you very much. Honorable Majority Leader, Honorable Representative of the Minority Leader, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Today, I want to start by reading out the functions of the NCCE as set out in the 1992 Constitution, because I want to properly situate our role in this process. So the functions shall be, A, to create and sustain within society awareness of the principles and objectives of this Constitution as the fundamental law of the people of Ghana. B, to educate and encourage the public to defend this Constitution at all times against all forms of abuse and violation. C, to formulate for the consideration of government from time to time programs at the national, regional, and district levels aimed at realizing the objectives of this Constitution. And then finally, to formulate, well, not finally, D, to formulate, implement, and oversee programs intended to inculcate in the citizens of Ghana awareness of their civic responsibilities and appreciation of their rights as freed people. And then finally, such other functions as Parliament may prescribe. I'm saying this just to remind all of us that our role in all of this is critical, because I think the Constitution set us out as the vanguard of the Constitution. NCCE is quite clear that we are interested in a constitutional review process, primarily because the people of Ghana are interested in a constitutional review process. That has been demonstrated in surveys, that has come up in a lot of processes, that the people are interested in the review. Therefore, we are interested, because our job is to ensure that the people not only accept the Constitution, but live by it, and most important, defend it at all times, because we want to remain a republic and we want the democracy to stand. I stand here today and I'm glad that we have here both representatives of the minority and the majority, because from the point of view of the NCCE, a constitutional review process will only succeed if it's bipartisan and multi-stakeholder in its approach. And we hope that this, what we see today with the majority and minority and other leaders of society here, will continue in this vein. We all know what happened in the last constitutional review. A great effort, excellent document, so comprehensive. NCCE was a great part of that process. We led the process that collected the opinions through the town hall meetings and other meetings that we facilitated, bringing on board the opinions of all Ghanaians. As far as we are concerned, a lot of that work is done already. What needs to change in this Constitution is overflowed. We have gone back and forth on it, so many lectures, so many opinions. Everything that can possibly be changed about this in this Constitution has already been laid out. So for me, this point forward should not be difficult. It should not be tedious. It should not be too long. It should be straightforward, crisp, and it should lead us to a point where we have a clear roadmap with steps that are clearly laid out for us to reach the goal that we are trying to reach. I want to reiterate that this has to be a bipartisan, multi-stakeholder approach, because it is the only approach that makes the NCCE comfortable. As an independent governance institution, as a non-partisan institution, as set out by the very Constitution we are trying to amend, it is very important that we send a strong signal that we will only be part of a process that is bipartisan, that is multi-stakeholder. To that end, I want to also point out that beyond the work that we did for the constitutional review in 2010, we also last year spent a lot of time and a lot of resources doing other work on the same Constitution. Last year, for our Constitution Week, we had a lecture that a lecture that was delivered by Justice Pomang, and it was this very subject was the focus of the lecture. In that lecture, we got a lot of opinions. We had a distinguished panel. We had a lot of opinions expressed. It's all documented. Beyond that, last year, as part of the same Constitution Week activities, we held events in all the regional capitals, speaking to a wide range of Ghanaians and getting some more opinions about what should be done with the Constitution. That document will be made public in the coming days. So as far as I'm concerned, all the work is done. And I hope that, again, this will not be a long, tedious process. I am happy to see all the people gathered here and all the people on their way. It gives me great comfort that I'm sitting in the right place this morning. And I wish all of us the best. And may we succeed in this noble venture that we are embarking on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. We are all in the right place. That's the conclusion I got from your submission. And so, to take us further, I would call on Madam Mavis Owusu-Gyamfi. I already introduced her, but she's the Executive Vice President of the African Center for Economic Transformation, ACET. Mavis, please put a hand together for her. She comes.
Thank you, my dear sister. Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Speaker, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. On behalf of all the Ghana Compact partners and Asset President Dr. K.Y. Amwako, it is a great pleasure to be here to welcome all of you to today's meeting on the Constitution. As most of you know, Ghana is often touted as the beacon of freedom and democracy in Africa, something that we are all proud of. Reference is often made to our outstanding record of regular and peaceful transfers of power between our leaders of the political parties, especially since the Fourth Republic in 1992. These transfers, however, have resulted in interruptions in policy direction and program implementation, which has led to frequent economic problems, IMF bailouts, and slowing progress of long-term economic transformation. Despite the fact that we have seen periods of high growth in the country over the past 3 decades, the structure of our economy in itself has not changed. It has remained virtually dependent on the production and export of a narrow range of unprocessed primary commodities. As our growth spikes during this period, it's always been driven by commodity price increases globally. And when those commodity prices go down, we see our growth also follow track. As a result, our per capita GDP, so the indicator that represents what people are actually getting out of this growth, has been insufficient to drive decent jobs in the country. For Ghana's growth to be sustainable and equitable, there needs to be a diversification of our product and service lines. Our exports need to be more competitive. We need to improve productivity across all of our sectors, and we need to ensure that we are using technology to upgrade and improve our sectors, such as agriculture. But most important, all of this needs to lead to human well-being. If we grow and we actually transform and it doesn't benefit ordinary Ghanaians, it's a pointless exercise. And at Asset, we call this growth with depth. The depth standing for diversification, export competitiveness, etc. Based on this depth framework, we've done some analysis on how African countries are transforming. The latest edition of our ATI, as we call it, will be out today. And I'm saddened to say that our beloved country, it will not be faring well in that index, especially in relation to a number of its peers. In this index, it will be in the lower third of the whole continent. So of all the countries that we've looked at, Ghana will fall in the bottom third. And this is due to the slow pace of transformation and the fact that the economy has not been able to build resilience to withstand shock. So we are seeing across the index that the countries that have made structural transformation, that have diversified their economies, that are export competitive, seem to withstand shocks better than those like Ghana that have not. So despite our excellent record on democracy as touted by the rest of the world, our political economy is not conducive to economic transformation. We are currently, and for a very long time, we've been beset by multiple crises: fiscal, jobs, gender, climate, political. On the fiscal front, over the last 2 decades, we've faced recurring fiscal deficits. This is not the first time we find ourselves in this situation as a country. We have seen periods of debt build-ups, high inflation, declining reserves, depreciation of the cedi, and high interest rates. And amidst it all, we always go for the bitter pill, and we are going back for that bitter pill right now. In 2022, we all saw that Ghana suffered a series of sovereign debt downgrades, which effectively locked us out of the capital market. But let me not rehearse issues that we all know and is being discussed extensively. I just want to focus on a few other issues here. Firstly, on the job front, we continue to see a rapidly growing youth population in our labor market, yet we are not seeing the youth dividend that other countries have seen. Our current job situation for young people is dire. The Ghana Statistical Services reported that youth unemployment is about 20% and under-unemployment is 50%, according to the World Bank. Now, in 2022, 360,000 young people graduated out of our senior secondary schools. Only 35% of these are likely to transit to tertiary education this year, which leaves over 240,000 of them going into the labor market. And as I've said, we know that 20% of these will be unemployed, 50% will be underemployed, and we also know that the rest will not necessarily end up in decent jobs. So let's move to the next issue, gender. Ghana currently lags behind many of its peers in achieving gender parity in employment, in representation in parliament, and in education. Our girls and young women are falling behind the rest of the world. Sadly, we fell from number 56 in the World Economic Forum Gender Parity Index in 2006 to number 117 in 2021. Not a great signal for the Black Star. Currently, in Parliament, women constitute only 14% of the members. And even though this is the highest we've ever reached, it is far below the 40% we aspire to as a country. Climate change. Climate is something that's affecting everybody. But we also know that in Ghana, the impact of this to our poor communities is very high because of our continuous dependence on agriculture and our inability and failure to upgrade our agricultural sectors over the decades. And linked to all of these is our growing political crisis, the political tension in our country. We have become polarized in politics. Earlier on, my sister Kathy said, it's great to see both parties in the room. So we need to come together to discuss our crises. Our crises are not a short-term issue. They are long-term entrenched issues that we've been navigating for decades. You know, the issue on fiscal, you can't say it's one party or the other. We have a history of both parties. The issue on gender, the issue of job, it's something that is entrenched in our system. And until we come together to find a solution to it, it will continue to play out irrespective of who's in power. At the heart of all of this is our constitution. You know, a lot of young people say we need a new constitution. For those of us who were young at the time, none of us agree with them. And we hope that they will change their minds because they will see that our constitution should be able to work for us. It might not be fit for purpose for our economic transformation, but we need to think through how we make the necessary amendments or how we improve the institutions that are necessary to make this constitution work for us economically. As Kathy said earlier on, our problem is not a lack of knowledge or a lack of know-how. We have a lot of incredible talent in this country that have researched and discussed the Constitution ad infinitum. I think our biggest challenge actually is to reach consensus on a way forward, to prioritize and sequence on a direction of travel for our consent, for the Constitution, so we can move forward. And this is why, for us, the Ghana Compact is important. It's not about, the different issues per se. It is and it isn't. Most importantly, it's about reaching consensus on the way forward for critical issues that we don't necessarily have an agreement on how to move forward on. And then holding ourselves to account for implementing the agreement that we have reached. And that's why we are honored today to be part of this discussion and to be working with the Honorable Ministry and all of our partners in the room today around agreeing a roadmap and a direction of travel for our Constitution. So, those of you who drove here today, or even if you didn't drive here today, you've seen a lot of red being worn all across Ghana. Today is the day of love and friendship. So I'm asking all of us, on the day of love and friendship, let's take a step back and think of the love of our beloved motherland and say, what is the first step, the second step, the third step to help us make progress towards amending, improving, whatever we need to do on our Constitution so that we can all realize the Ghana that we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mavis. I knew Mavis would speak for the girls. I knew she'd miss that. So, thank you for the succinct delivery. It's the bit about what we want, what are the steps are very important because we can't jump from A to Z. At this point, well, between A and Z, there's C and D, CDD. Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh is here representing CDD and has a few words to share with us on the journey thus far on constitutional review. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Would you, yes please.
Sincere apologies for not making it here on time. As one of the first CSOs, post-1993 CSOs focused largely on governance issues. I think right from the inception, CDD has been quite keen on how we ensure that the constitution that we have is fit for purpose, and that it helps to promote good governance. So from 1998, when we were established, I think those of you who have followed our activities over the years can bear testimony to the fact that the Constitution and analysis of the Constitution and the study of the Constitution have been among our most primary engagements. And over the years, as an institution, we have advocated for some changes based on our analysis of the way the governance landscape was evolving. So we welcomed the setting up of the Constitution Review Commission by Professor Atta Mills, and we actually led a civil society coalition. We formed a coalition that interacted with the CRC and developed a number of inputs for its assignment. So we fed certain inputs into the CRC process, papers, commission studies, and other such inputs, most of them trying to look at particular portions of the Constitution and making proposals for amendment. In the 2019 period, in the period after the 2016 elections, we also returned to the issue of constitutional reform, this time led by our Afrobarometer surveys. We focused largely on reform of local government. So our Afrobarometer surveys have consistently told us that Ghanaians, among all of the many things that Ghanaians want to see done with our constitution, one key issue is reform of local government. So Afrobarometer has told us more than 2 times since 2016 that large majorities of Ghanaians would like to see their MMDCEs elected. On the other hand, equally large majorities seem uncertain, certainly skeptical of the proposition that those persons be elected on the basis of political parties. So we have followed up on these various findings, and in the period leading up to the failed referendum, we, NIDEC, and another sister organization, a much smaller local one, coalesced behind a project to garner support for the amendments that were proposed, both for constitutional, a referendum to review Article 55.3, as well as to get the supermajority that was needed in Parliament to reform other companion provisions to enable citizens to elect their MMDCs and the like. I think the Honorable Majority Leader was witness to some of the efforts that we made in that direction. We had substantial interactions with, significant interactions with the Ministry at the time of Local Government and Rural Development, and then with 2 key parliamentary committees, the Committee on Local Government as well as the Committee on Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. And we and IDEC thought that we were close to brokering a deal, actually. At some point, I think the Honorable Minister was in the room. This was a bipartisan joint meeting of the 2 committees, and we were trying to figure out what it is that separated the 2 and trying to get them to come to some consensus around it. And we left the room thinking we had brokered this wonderful deal, almost like going for Nobel Prize stuff. only to wake up a day or 2 later and discover that the whole agreement had unraveled. and then it just snowballed into this cancellation of the whole referendum. So we of course were very disappointed with that, but did not give up. In the lead up to 2022, we undertook an exercise to what we call the Manifesto Project. The idea here was to just get a number of experts to study and analyze in a very comprehensive way a number of sectors of our society, politics, governance, and then to identify the key gaps and the deficits in those areas, and then we would feed those inputs again to the political parties. So we met with the political parties and told them what we were about to do, and we said, rather than wait for you to come up with a manifesto and then we would make critiques of it, I think that it would be helpful if we fed some inputs into your process. But again, rather than CDD sit there and then divine its own sense of what is wrong with Ghana and what you need to fix, we would actually commission studies. I think we had 11 various sectors, including governance, and we had them study a number of documents, a number of secondary material, literature, and then identify from their own expertise what it was that they thought needed to be focused on by the parties. Among the areas was governance and, of course, other areas. And a number of proposals came out of that, many of which would require constitutional review. So that was also something that we did. We met with the parties, fed them with these inputs. To what extent that influenced their manifestos, we cannot tell. We, of course, looked at the manifestos after the fact, after they were developed. There were some alignments with some of the proposals that we had made, and of course, there were many instances where there was no alignment at all. But that's basically, we were not expecting that everything that we suggested would be taken. For the current period, we continue to be engaged on the constitutional review exercise, though on a more selective basis. We have two projects running, one on the local government, which follows up on, again, remember that when the referendum was cancelled, the accompanying statement or address by the president was to the effect that it was cancelled for lack of national consensus. There was a very interesting meeting we had in Koforidua where, for the Eastern Regional Consultative Meeting, where we posed a hypothetical and said, okay, so assuming that we could have parties participate in these elections, but make it look as though the elections were just the way they are today. Because somebody had said, look, we know that the parties are involved in local government elections, but because they are not officially allowed to participate in it, they don't cause all the problems they bring to the local community when they are visibly participating, which was an interesting insight. So, and then we asked them, so what are those things that they said? Well, all these rallies, campaigns, all the money they spend, all of the divisiveness in the local community. So, okay, so what if we could actually have those elections with parties participating, but we could actually arrange the system, create a set of rules that almost did away with rallies, for example. There's no reason we can't do that by law. What if we did away with rallies? It's okay, you can have parties, but you only have maybe 3 moderated town hall meetings, moderated by NCCE or maybe a coalition of CSOs. No rallies. We regulate a number of billboards, the size of billboards. We do all kinds of things to make it look like just the way it is with local assembly people. Say, yeah, we know they are party people, but they pretend that they are not party. We like that better. So that was a very useful exercise for us, and it informed our thinking about some of the reforms that we might have to make to accompany this idea of electing MMDCEs, because we know that the parties are split on that issue. I mean, one side does not want to have parties, the other side is party or no deal at all. So what we've been trying to do is find a midway that would bridge this gap. So that's one project we're still working on. The other is a program on campaign finance reform, which we've been doing with, a stakeholder group that includes representation from both political parties at the highest level, both NPP, NDC, and of course even with some independents and CPP, and Electoral Commission representatives and other people. And among the recommendations that are coming out of that second process, some of course will also impact constitutional reform. So at CDD currently, these are the two projects that we're working on that have implications for constitutional reform. We don't have any grand constitutional reform project as such, but we have seen wisdom in the initiative by ASET on this compact, and we have aligned ourselves with the principles and the objectives and the ambitions of the compact. So currently, we consider ourselves partners in this process. We think it's a useful vehicle for us to be aligned with, and we share in its aspirations. So anything that works, I mean, we're looking for whatever it is that works, actually. We are not glued to any particular idea of our own. If the process works, whoever initiates it, we're happy to work with them. So that's where we stand. And I again must commend ASET for coming out of its ivory tower shell somewhere. And somebody actually said, maybe, when they lost their building to the National Cathedral, it taught them some sense. So, but I don't know. It's good that you are weighing in on this important issue. Numerous civil society organizations have tried it without much success in the past, and we're happy that you are bringing your gravitas and your influence to bear on this as well, and we're happy to cooperate with you and with the ministry. I know that our minister has been, at this point, I don't know if he's the sole champion of this constitutional reform agenda on one half of the political class, but however it goes, I think we are very happy to cooperate with all the partners involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. That's my boss. He has so many titles already. We are adding sole champion to it as well. The next to speak is the rep for the minority leader. Is Honorable Amar Kofi-Boa. He's the MP for Lembele. Honorable, for this assignment that you have taken on, we need a lot of money.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. So the money from the gas plant. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Nadi. I bring you greetings from the minority leader. Honorable Atufosin was supposed to have been here, but is engaged in another very important meeting. The Honorable Minority Leader for Parliamentary Affairs, the Chief Director, I see that we are partnering with very important players who have been very instrumental in a lot of important issues in Ghana, especially with the constitutional reform issue, NCCE, ASET, IE, and CDD. I thought it was only the political parties that occasionally give low blows to ourselves. I didn't know that you do it among yourself as well. But let me begin by thanking the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs for this engagement and the stated commitment by the Chief Director that they can only go forward in a bipartisan spirit. I think I can tell you that in this discussion, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. I think we all agree that the 1992 Constitution, even though it has served us very well, I think on this occasion we are talking, and I'm sure the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs will be talking about it. We are celebrating 30 years of our stability, and obviously the 1992 Constitution has played a very important role. But we all agree that the 1992 Constitution has a lot of challenges. I think some of the description that we're giving is the inconsistencies, nebulous provisions, lots of gray areas. And so there's a need for us to review and reform, to invigorate this Constitution to serve us better. It is in this direction that obviously everybody has made a reference, and we pay tribute to our late President Mills, who set up the Constitutional Review Commission. It so happened that I was a deputy minister at the time, I witnessed, and I'm happy that Professor Tubiba is here. He was a very instrumental in that commission. So it was very, very clear, and I'm sure that as I listened to everybody that has spoken, it goes back to that same reason why that commission was set up. And there were very key findings that were, quite frankly, brought up. And without boring you, I'll be very brief on some of the key ones. We all agreed that the power of the executive was too excessive, and that we need to deal with it. I mean, where else in this world do we, anytime a government comes to power, everybody must go from every boardroom in Ghana for a new one to come? That is fundamentally a problem. And so the issue of the power of the executive vis-a-vis the other organs of government, whether it's the judiciary or parliament especially, and that ties into the other provisions about members of parliament with this hybrid idea of making sure that we are part of the executive and also members of parliament. And there are a lot of interesting stories that we tell where somebody asked a member of parliament, but if you are so strong in this view, then why don't you go out and say it and speak? He says, okay, if I speak, it means that I'm completely taken out completely. No chance that I will ever be a minister or a deputy minister. Therein lies the fundamental problem. Or I will be a board member. The members of parliament, the legislature that is clouded with the power to scrutinize, supervise the executive, is occasionally at the mercy of the executive at the same time. Fundamentally a problem that needs to really be addressed. And one of the reasons, the National Development Planning Commission. I mean, when our sister was talking about how we are stuck with the economic system that completely cannot move. We can't add value to the things that we have comparative advantage. We know what must be done. That if we can add value to the things we have comparative advantage and stop the export of raw materials, we can move faster. We all know that. But we are stuck because every time we have a new government, we have new slogans, we start afresh, leave every other project, we don't have long-term planning, and then we go, a new one comes. So the need to really have long-term planning that will have everybody's buy-in based on all the needs of our country. We know we have housing problem. Every government that is coming must address the issue of housing. We know that on an annual basis, power, the need to add additional power is an issue. So every government that is coming must really know that when it comes to the issues of energy, this is something we are going to do. And so it is not rocket science for all new governments to be tied into a national development plan. But to the extent that I serve on the National Development Planning Commission as an energy minister, and I can be sure that we spend long hours on a lot of things that had been developed. When you leave power, the next NDPC will also start afresh and also spend more hours in planning new stuff. How do we address our long-term planning needs so that it is consistent along the political divide? Those are the issues that came up. Judicial reforms. I mean, yesterday I read a letter that says that the Chief Justice has sent a letter that says that the appeals courts will be in 3 regions. I mean, we know we will be dealing with some new appointment to the Supreme Court as we go. And the last time I counted, we were probably at 20, and we're probably going to go more. They use the example of the United States, 50 states, 50 countries, so to speak. 8 members of the Supreme Court for the last 100 and how many years, God knows. I mean, is it difficult to set limits to how many people we can appoint to the judiciary? These were the fundamental issues that I think all of us must agree and address. And so, Article 248 of the Constitution, I mean, we talked about local government, decentralization, tied into the point that has just been raised about district assembly elections. I mean, we can find the solutions. Parliament, parliamentary oversight, and a lot of issues that, quite frankly, are key to our development if we are to go forward. So the point is that we must agree on one thing when we live here, that our constitutional reforms and the need to really review our constitution is long overdue. We must agree on it and agree on a roadmap to try to make sure that we can address the fundamental issues that we all agree on. I think that should not be too difficult. Sadly, the Constitutional Review Commission under Mills went all the way with a white paper and came to Parliament for these major proposals to basically be passed into law. And that's where we got stuck. And so I think we are back to where we started. I'm very happy that the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs is rejuvenating it. We stand ready to work on an agreement that really help our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. The gas money. If there are 2 things that the minority and the majority agree on every time. The first one, I won't mention it, but the second one is constitutional review. That the first one is, I won't say it. What do you say? Okay, someone said that's Gracia. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I'm not going there. But on a more serious note, once the 2 elephants have agreed, I think that for those of us gathered here, I'm sorry? My boss says that the elephant will trump the umbrella. So anyway, so the grass shouldn't suffer anymore. I'm sure this task will be achieved. The next to speak, he wasn't on the schedule, but he has to be given to speak is Prof. Ernest Aite. He's a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana. And now he's the Secretary General of the African Research Institute, Universities Alliance. You know, Prof, before you take the microphone, my boss told me one day in confidence, so Dorothy, it's my eternal regret that I didn't go to University of Ghana. So please consider him if there's any opportunity. Thank you, Prof. Please.
Thank you very, very much. I'm sure Raymond can fix that problem. Honorable Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Honorable Minister for former Minister for Energy, right? And today you are the Deputy Minority Leader. Congratulations. Other MPs here, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I came to listen to what was going to be said. And actually, you all know that I don't know anything about the Constitution. I don't know anything about reforms. But the only thing that qualifies me to be here is that I work closely with ASSET, and I've been involved in the development of the compact. And as a part of my engagement with ASSET, I shared with them a paper that I wrote for the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, so I shared the platform with Raymond, where we're looking at constitutional review. I was invited to make that presentation not because I knew anything about constitutions, but that I had been involved in many things that had impacted on the enforcement of the Constitution. So as somebody whose work every day is affected by the Constitution, what do you think about the Constitution and how it should be looked at? That's why the Academy put me there. So I spoke about things like the economy, as Mavis has done today. And in doing all of those, as I said, I agree entirely with all those who have recommended over the years the need for us to take a second look at the Constitution. I've seen what Esquisi Prempe has written over the years. I've read the report that Raymond and the CRC wrote. My big brother, Nana SKB Asante, has said quite a bit and written quite a bit about all of that. So the experts in this country have spoken. My view has been that there is a certain political culture that has emerged with the Constitution since 1992, and it is that culture that influences the way we implement the Constitution. The culture that says that, it's a new culture that I didn't know about before 1992, but since 1992, we've seen it come out in the form of the government can do anything. You see, the government can do anything. So if you have a constitution, no matter who is in power, whether it's NDC or NPP, and you make Ghanaians believe that that government can do anything and you can't question it, then it doesn't really matter what the constitution is about. That has been my position. That's what I articulated. And I gave several examples of the government can do anything. We saw in Ghana under military regimes that strong perception that government can do anything. When we began in 1992, it wasn't that acute. But with time, we've seen the evolution of that political culture. Some people call it subculture, but it's a culture that if it's MPP, they can do anything. And when they leave and NDC comes, they can do anything and nobody can challenge it. I would like to see, as we move forward in considering reviews, being able to make Ghanaians aware that there are limits to what the government can do. That there's a limit to what the president can do. There's a limit to what the judiciary can do. There's a limit to what parliament can do. So long as we operate with a mindset that once you are the president of Ghana, you can do anything you like and nobody can challenge it. It will not matter what type of constitution. So, Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, I'm very happy to see that in this room there's a strong desire for us to review the Constitution. I fully support it. But I say, as we do it, let us ensure that no matter how it is rewritten, it places emphasis on limits to the power of the government, where the government is not simply the president, but the various arms, and that the limits are obvious, that the limits are clearly stated, so that the ordinary Ghanaian will know that there's a limit on the powers of the president. Today, the ordinary Ghanaian thinks that the president can do anything at all he likes. A parliament can do anything at all that they like. The Supreme Court can do anything that they likes. We got to change that culture. And once we do, the Constitution will work well for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, apart from a desire to see some change, I also see a sense of purpose and almost galvanizing all the different sectors of our society at this time. And I think that this momentum will go on and give us fruits down the line. After 9 a.m. in the morning, they'll tell you that if you had a meal 9 p.m. before, your blood sugar level will be going low, and it gives you fogginess and tiredness. So there's some snacks laid out there. There's tea, there's coffee, there's Milo. In fact, today is World Ghana Cocoa Day, Ghana Chocolate Day. There is chocolate drink, and if anyone wants something, just shoot your hand up. A lady will be in to give you something. We'll have lunch at 12:30, but for now, that's what's been served. There's some water as well on your tables. So the next person to be called up needs no introduction. Almost everyone has mentioned him in their speech. He's a chief. He says that he's not gazetted, so we call him Nana Sumpahene. Otumfo honored him in 2017. Besides being majority minority, he's been everything in Parliament, and he's a Minister for Parliamentary Affairs. Honorable Osei Mesa Bonsu, the podium is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Director of Programs. But just to assure my colleagues, the Honorable Kofi Amaboa, standing in for the Minority Leader, and the Honorable Bernard Ahiafo, that my Sumpahene is not a black-stooled chief. So I do not breach the Constitution in any way. I'm qualified to be in Parliament, just for the avoidance of doubt. And Madam NCC, you made a point, but say that everything you thought, with respect to the proposals for amending the Constitution, you think that everything has been sorted out, and now the way out is to define a roadmap and what should be done. And I think that, as I said, the devil is always in the detail. Even with respect to your own outfit, let me take your mind to Article 234. Independence of the Commission, the independence of your Commission. The Constitution provides, except as otherwise provided in this Constitution or in any other law, which is not inconsistent with this Constitution, the Commission, that is the NCC, shall not be subject to the direction or control of any person or authority in the performance of its functions. That's your Commission. Now, come back to Article 225 of the Constitution. It relates to the independence of the Commission and Commissioners, and that has to do with SHRAG. There's a difference. It talks about the independence of the Commission and the Commissioners. For your own, the emphasis is just on the Commission. For SHRAG, is on the Commission and the Commissioners. So 225 provides, except as otherwise as provided by this Constitution or by any other law, not inconsistent with this Constitution, the Commission and the Commissioners shall, in the performance of their functions, not be subject to the direction or control of any person or authority. There, a distinction is made between the Commission and the Commissioners. For your Commission, it's only the Commission. So what of the Commissioners? Could they be subject to any direction by any person in the performance of their functions. So it's just maybe trite, but I thought that it's something that we may have to look at. Just to say that we need to really look closer. And when we get to the bolts and nuts, there are so many things that we should be looking at. But having said so, my colleague, the minority leader, stand in, the chairperson of NCC, chair of Media Commission, the former vice chancellor, the chair of the Legal, Constitutional and Parliamentary Affairs Committee, dean of the University of Ghana Law School, Professor Kwesi Prempeh, and Madam, standing in for Dr. K.Y. Amwako, that is SS officers and staff, esteemed experts, the Chief Director and staff of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Abuchi, I should acknowledge you, but you were late in coming, so you didn't register on my radar. Good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm encouraged and indeed deeply humbled by your presence here this morning. Permit me to warmly welcome all of us once again on behalf of the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and on my own part. It is indeed heartwarming to see all of you out here. As far as I'm concerned, this shows your dedication to the call to duty. Indeed, on the lighter side, I would like to wish all of us a happy Valentine's Day. We are instructed now to say a happy chocolate day. You see, growing up in my small village, Francho and Bremen, there was nothing like Valentine's Day. This morning, I woke up and she who must be obeyed had come to adorn my bed with a bouquet of roses. And just to quote my original chairman, Chairman Wontumi, whom am I to pretend that I'm not in love? Your presence here on Valentine's Day is noteworthy. Even for the recycled septuagenarians. I guess it's a sure indication that your love for this country is deep. That same love for God and country lead us on into this venture. I would like to single out and welcome my colleague, as I said, the stand-in, the new minority leader who is joining us, the deputy minority leader who is joining us for the first time, since his elevation to this new office. And I think I must also commend the Right Honourable Mansumani Kingsford Babing, Speaker of the 8th Parliament, who is giving us his blessings. The late President, Professor J.E. Mills of blessed memory, must also be commended for the valiant attempt in 2010. Equally, must we also commend Right Honourable Professor Michael Quay, Speaker of the 7th Parliament, for dedicating his retirement to the constitutional review. Professor Kwesi Prempeh has reminded us of what CDD has been doing since its birth. Let's not forget that President Kufuor, in his last message on the state of the nation, related to some aspects of the Constitution, including in particular the Council of State, which he proposed to be reconstructed. And one cannot also forget the storm that the late Vincent Assise generated when he proposed the extension of the tenure of the president. That was only into the 8th year of the implementation of the 1992 Constitution. But come to think of it, stripped of declaration, it was nonetheless a proposal to consider for amending the Constitution. And that was way back in 1998. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs was commenced in 1993 by the late President Rawlings. It continued under President Kufuor, but was prescribed under President Mills and President Mahama. That is from 2009 to 2016. Acting as an interface between the executive and the legislature, the ministry facilitates government business through its minister, who is also the leader of government business, and is positioned as a conduit for access to Parliament. One other important mandate of the ministry is to support, enhance, and entrench democratic governance practices in the quest to broaden and deepen the growth of democracy in the Republic. This we have done creditably since 1993 under the late Honorable J.H. Usue Champong, continued under Dr. Kwabena J. and also under the Honorable Papa Usue Nkoma Felix Usue Japan, Osei Edu, and my humble self as we continue the various activities. We had fruitful interactions with various state and non-state actors, and we have employed soft power to attract and shape preferences and opinions through advocacy and cautious activism in a bid to co-opt and gather a critical mass of stakeholders to effect changes where needed or to perpetuate aspects of our governance architecture that are worth maintaining. As has become typical of me, the ethos of my political career is predicated on the introduction of the preamble to the 1992 Constitution, which states its purpose, aims, and justification as and I quote, an exercise of our natural and inalienable right to establish a framework of government which shall secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity, unquote. This is what we have overwhelmingly voted for in the 1992 referendum. A system of governance that was to set us on a path of an all-inclusive, sustainable growth and prosperity. How do we measure up in our own noble commitment and pledge 30 years down the lane? Current events expose all of us, the generality of the citizenry, and especially those of us who have served in the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, constitutional creatures like NCCE, SHRAG, NDPC, the Electoral Commission, the Media Commission, as well as civil society, religious bodies, civil and public services. Can we say in good conscience that after 30 years, this national vision, as captured in the preamble of the Constitution, has been achieved? Where we are today, we must admit, is not the best of circumstances. And we can attribute these matters to the gross negligence on the part of office holders. We have not reinforced each other as strategic partners in the development agenda of the country. All of us have been negligent in one way or the other. And the combination of the deficit in our performance is what we are seeing today. We are not acting responsibly enough, not looking over our shoulders to ensure that the various anchors of our body politic are performing well, efficiently and effectively, the functions entrusted. We would not be where we are today if all of us were diligent in the discharge of our assigned roles. It is the reason why we have to do serious introspection on our Constitution to identify weaknesses and shortcomings which lead to the deficits that I'm alluding to on the part of the various players with a view to curing the mischief. That's why I must applaud Dr. Kewa Mwako, the architect of the Ghana Compact. The Compact, an initiative driven by ASET and many policy partners, is focused on the process to help us articulate the future we want for Ghana, our children and grandchildren by 2050. The ambition of the compact is to be driven by citizens, embraced by leaders, and shaped by the aspirations of young people and the experience of the elders. It will focus on setting a shared vision for our nation, outlining solutions for the country's biggest challenges, identifying targets for tracking progress towards this vision. Now, the question to ask, as I engaged Dr. Kiwe Amoako, is how different is what you are purposed to do from what is set out in the Constitution for NDPC. And the point is, can you force administrations, the senior administration, to embrace your own concept? How do you get it sorted out, regardless of the noble intentions? As a Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, I have since 2017 flagged the need to revisit the 1992 Constitution. The annual action plan of the ministry encapsulates this activity as is the priority area of the minister under the key issue, deepening democratic governance. This is because, as a practicing parliamentarian of continuous 26 years experience, I believe I have some acquaintance with the 1902 Republican Constitution and therefore properly primed to advocate for a review. Distinguished guests, it has been 3 decades since the 4th Republican Constitution of Ghana was promulgated. This constitution has endured and served the nation generally well, having successfully underpinned the 4th Republic, which is the longest democratic dispensation this country has enjoyed since independence. Of course, we all know the reinforcing factors, in particular, the hybrid system that you're operating, because we all must admit that the 1981 coup found expression because of the fissures that had developed at the front of the President Liman's PNP, which cracks and fissures were exploited to overthrow that regime. Of course, the immediate cause was the jettisoning of the budget that the party with an overwhelming majority in Parliament suffered. And then advantage, or should I say disadvantage, was taken of it and the government was overthrown. So this arrangement that we have today has served us well up to this point. But certainly there are some defects and deficiencies that we must at the same time attend to. There have been numerous appeals for the Constitution to be revisited. Many well-meaning and prominent Ghanaians have made suggestions for the amendment of particular constitutional provisions and even a reconsideration of the suitability of our system of governance. Which framework, presidential, Westminster, or a hybrid, would facilitate optimum development for a small unitary state such as ours? Many cases have been made, as alluded to earlier, since the days of Rawlings for amending the 1902 Constitution. I do not intend to reinvent the wheel, but it appears so much talk has already gone into the need to amend the Constitution, and my humble view is that the time for concrete action is now. The executive have had cause to complain about various issues. The legislature, as my colleague, the Honorable Amabua, the Deputy Minority Leader, has restated, have also identified many roadblocks, not mere ramble strips, but roadblocks in the performance of their functions. The judiciary also have several hurdles in their way, not least because they have to live with a prehistoric creature christened the public tribunal system, which finds expression in the Constitution. The Electoral Commission have their own challenges. The NCCE, the poor cousins of the Electoral Commission, the Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice, the Auditor General, the Media Commission, complaining every time and now that their powers are limited, all have myriad challenges. Some of these problems are categorized as entrenched provisions, which require tact, courage, energy, and huge resources to even tinker with them. Some of these challenges fall within the category of non-entrenched clauses, amending which is not least cumbersome. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning our task is to participate in consultations with the experts to outline and propose the content, format, and roadmap with landmarks that will help us actualize our long talked about need for a review of the 1992 Constitution. And I guess those of us here present, among many others, some sadly departed, have over the years engaged in varied efforts aimed at the review and amendment of the 1992 Constitution. I will not bore you with a litany of issues already raised pre- and post-2010 effort and recently. However, there are three areas that, for purposes of today's discussion, that I may want to relate to. One, the executive, the NDPC, and perhaps by extension, independent governance institutions and political parties that I would like to strand out for mention for today's purpose. Many issues have been identified, and so much has been said about the weakness of the 1992 Constitution. It's been described by some reviewers as a permissive document, and I'm quoting Dr. H. Kwesi Prempeh. That's a permissive document that maybe we'll be able to mold as and when we please. The CRC characterized it as a political document, which called for a need to transform it into a developmental constitution. At this juncture, I will just, as I said, want to touch on these three pertinent items and the need revisiting the constitution. The executive, as earlier said, the character of the executive president established by the 1992 Constitution has been described as a constitutional monarch. This is not the making of any of our past presidents or the present president. The powers vested in the president in the discharge of his executive functions, maybe to quote myself, really not transform. It doesn't transform, but really transmogrify the president into a superhuman being whose shadow, when it falls on you, could either cast a spell on you or be sufficient to heal you of your all afflictions. Look at the numerous appointments that he makes. Thousands of appointments that the president makes. So people appear before the president as gaping sycophants, pleading in spoken language or unspoken language to make them somebody's. He's the commander-in-chief not only of the armed forces of the country, but all living and non-living things in the country. And that is so. It's the reason why every mineral resource is invested in the president. Living and non-living things are invested in one person. And he decides where to grow and where not to grow. Should we consider the Westminster system as opposed to the presidential system of governance? A World Bank report on corruption is unequivocal that for unitary states, in particular small unitary states such as ours, parliamentary democracy works better and is less corrupt. In any event, at independence, what was bequeathed to us was the Westminster system. How did we migrate to the presidential system? With all the ills. Educational objectives, cultural objectives, and international relations. The NDPC is mandated to craft a long-term development plan from these development themes for the nation, based upon which the various political parties are required to craft their manifestos. And that is Article 55(3) of the Constitution. When this has been achieved, then the relevance of Article 35(7), which provides, and I quote, "as far as practicable, a government shall continue and execute the projects and programs commenced by the previous government," then this relevance will be established. This has become difficult to achieve because Political parties have no guide from the NDPC. On the part of the NDPC, it is not for want of trying. We all saw what was begun by the G.H. Mensah-led NDPC, plus Professor Jambafo. It was jettisoned. And then we had Professor Kusiboche and Dr. Nimoy Thompson. The document they produced, close an excellent document. But what happened? The truth of the matter is that the very composition of the NDPC, as provided under Article 86, makes it politically tainted ab initio. The provision on the NDPC, especially in respect of its overwhelming population by ministers from one political party, as captured under Article 86(2). And I think that that provision shall have to be amended, and indeed amended, to strengthen the role of the NDPC to serve as the principal driver of the national development with the long-term development plans that they shall formulate. Otherwise, succeeding administration shall have no appetite for the products of the NDPC. The resort to manifestos as the social contract between the government and the government then becomes only episodic. So you leave, another government comes. Why should that government continue your manifesto? Your manifesto pledge with it. If we had a long-term plan around which the parties will weave their manifestos, then the relevance, as I said, of the direct principle of state policy will be established, and everybody would then buy into that. But if you have a certain Kofi Amabua being a lead character of NDPC because a minister of one administration, and then follows a certain Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempe, I mean, we'll be swinging from left to right. And that is what we are seeing. And that's why when I had a discussion with Dr. Akira Mwakwa, I told him that you are beginning a very noble venture. I'm sharpening to think where you are going to place the product ultimately. If you're able to work closely with the NDPC, fair and fine. Can we have an interrogation of the composition of the NDPC? If, for instance, we are saying that populated with maybe, for purposes of this discussion, maybe the chancellors of the various universities in the country. That one, there's nothing anybody can do about that. Maybe the heads of the economic faculties in the various universities. Nobody can say anything about that. Inclusive of maybe relevant civil society organizations. Nobody can say anything about that. But if indeed it's populated by ministers of a serving government, a succeeding administration certainly will not want to do anything with it, which is what is happening now. So, distinguished colleagues, I believe that we really have to do serious introspection on the Constitution. If we want to transform it into a development document, we must all confront the reality of our times. As far as concerned, the Constitution positioning the NDPC to drive this agenda makes it really an excellent proposal. But what to do with this product? Political parties are vehicles for shaping the political will of the people, to disseminate information, and this information must be well researched, appropriate, and also appropriate, not sheer propaganda. So to disseminate information on political ideas, social and economic programs, and sponsor candidates for elections to any public office other than district or local government units. And that's Article 55 of the Constitution. What information should they be disseminating? And the Constitution is clear that it should be on political ideas, social and economic programs. They should borrow hugely from the long-term development plan of the NDPC. The good thing for us is that, and I keep saying this, that by the construct of the directive principles of state policy, all political parties are centrist parties in this country. The MPP just belongs a little bit to the right of the center. The NDC is just a little bit to the left of the center. There are no extreme parties in this country. So with that, and of course, the broad contours of the development agenda, as I said, is set out for us as a country in the directive principle of state policy. And if we are weaving our national development plan on it, we may only vary in the details of implementation. And with that will be the commitment then to continue from where the previous administration left off. And it's why the political parties themselves, as I said, must get it right. And the political parties must also be populated by experienced, competent, efficient, and effective persons who can churn out ideas which have the potential of maximizing the rate of socio-economic development to secure maximum welfare, freedom, and happiness of every person in Ghana, and to provide adequate means of livelihood and sustainable employment to the Ghanaian people and public assistance to the needy, as captured under Article 36 of the Constitution. In 1996, amendments were made to some unentrenched provisions in the Constitution. And according to Justice Puamang, as at the time the 1996 amendments were made, the Constitution had not lived that long. But because of political will, some important changes were made. And he added, I want to quote him, I believe those changes enabled the Constitution to deal with challenges that would have been with us today if they had not been tackled then, unquote. They will still have the political will to strand out various provisions of the Constitution and deal with them one by one. They will still have the political will. If we did, then what Professor Kwesi Prempeh alluded to certainly would not have happened. Because in Parliament we had agreed. We had agreed. So when CDD and IDEC stepped in, I even told them that we didn't need them because we had agreed already. Then they took us to Kempinski. I don't know whether it was the Kempinski environment. that introduced some spokes. They took us there. We had about finished with everything. And that day, I remember that the minority leader then had to leave us because he had to travel to Tamale. We had agreed on everything. And just when he left, one of us in the room then said, oh, we have about finished everything. Can you go and consult the parties outside Parliament? That was the beginning of the end. So they came to consult the parties outside Parliament. And one of the parties outside Parliament decided that they would not go along. And a firm instruction was given. I don't know which party was that, but a firm instruction then was given that can you depart from this path? That was how it ended. So when the president came in to say that further consultations ought to be made and he was going to pursue it, with the entrenched positions, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. That's why we are where we are. Ladies and gentlemen, it is understandable but regrettable that the first major attempt to amend the 1982 Constitution was botched, attributable mainly to procedural defects. That stalled attempts at review in 2010 by the late former President J.E. Atta Mills through the Constitutional Review Commission. I think it was self-inflicted. The provisions of the Constitution are clear. And in my view, it may not lie in the purview of the executive to purport to initiate a constitutional amendment with a white paper. Notwithstanding, that effort cannot by any means be described as an exercise in futility. It has bequeathed to this nation a veritable source document full of very useful and relevant material that will be the foundation for a holistic review exercise. However, we know that a lot of water has passed under the bridge since 2010. For example, one subject matter that is very dear to my heart is the excessive monetization of our politics. And even before then, let me relate to the gender issues that were raised. I think that if we cling to the first past post system in the Constitution, we are never going to get it right. That is having many more women at elective positions. By appointment, yes, but by elective positions, as it is in Parliament, you never can get it right. Because there's no Parliament anywhere in the world which restricts itself to the first past post that is able to achieve gender balance. You can't have it. Not UK, not Canada, not US, not Australia, not India. Where it is that you have it is where they resort to proportional representation. And if you have to come by that, then certainly we need to amend the Constitution. Otherwise, talk outside the house, remain talk outside the house. But I was saying that monetization should engage us. This is a phenomenon that I experienced for the first time in 2016. Because since my entry into Parliament in 1997, I'd always had the opportunity or the benefit of being endorsed to Parliament, by popular acclaim. But 2016, I tasted it somewhere. Prof, in your CRC report on point 178E, under findings and observations, page 367, monetization is captured, and I quote, and I'm quoting you, a high perception of monetization of electioneering process. A high perception. Well, you qualified it high. It remains a perception. The report refers to a real canker in our politics as a high perception. Prof, I'm sorry to report to you that that feature is not a perception. The CDD, Prof, you are here. You've done an empirical study and you put the cost of running to become a member of Parliament from primaries to general elections as, to quote you, 600,000 United States dollars. In fact, it related to the 2016 electioneering campaign. I shall have to think what figure may emerge in the impending 2024 presidential and general elections. And for those of them who are going to contest, I will wish them well. And I'll shed a few tears with them. There are times when aspiring parliamentarians put their houses out on mortgage for loans. If they win, then they will join the National Redemption Council to redeem what they have lost. If they don't, what happens to them? Right? If they win National Redemption Council, or perhaps National Liberation Council, to redeem and liberate themselves. So you give them possessions and you think it's there as a Father Christmas. You reap what you sow. And then you turn around to accuse politicians of corruption. And yet you see what is going on. And, Prof. Abuchi, maybe your nephew has ever asked a politician, can you sponsor me kakra? Where is he going to get the money from to sponsor you? In Parliament, within the caucuses, after taking your loan and you having to pay a percentage of your emolument to pay off the loan you've taken to purchase your vehicle, the caucuses exact some fees on the MPs every month. And I'll tell you, there are some who are already in red, they can't pay. So where do they get the money? Outside their own state of indebtedness to give to the constituents. Colleagues, we are in trouble as a country. We must own up to it. And as I said, when these things happen, the cost to the nation is not the only problem that I see, but the effect on the legislature is there for all of us to see. Are we building a legislature for money bags and people with fat wallets, or for competent and well-tested people who will bring their various experiences to bear in our nation building? Arguably, the greatest function of the legislature is legislation. How many of our honorable members are left in the House when the House is considering and passing laws? The Honorable Enyimedu is the current chairman of Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. You should tell us how many people are left in the chamber when we are crafting laws. The former chairman is here, Honorable Ben Abdallah, and the Honorable Ben Ahiafo is a member of that committee and is a member of the winnowing committee that I've put together that works in my office to screen all these bills that come before us. When we are doing that, in passing laws, you don't have, at any given time, you will never have more than 15 members of parliament concentrating on that. And yet, the greatest function of the legislature, the legislative arm of government, is legislation. Where are they? Even in the performance of the financial control function, how many are scrutinous and diligent? In the performance of oversight, how many MPs know their bearings and understand the tools to employ? Our colleagues will be having their primaries in May. Everything is being reduced to monetary considerations. Minority Leader, true or false? True or false? True or false?
You have said it.
I mean, colleagues, that is the simple truth. We must own up to these things and start working to improve them. It may be a blessing in disguise that there's a groundswell of opinion at this time for a review, a perfect storm that gives us no option than to rally all stakeholders for urgent inclusive consultations. We're talking about post-COVID-19 pandemic world that we live in now, where someone seizes in Wuhan, China, and the world gets locked down, with attendant myriad far-reaching, seemingly unintended health, mental, economic, and societal consequences. A world where one president wakes up one morning and decides to attack a neighboring country more than 5,000 flight miles away from Ghana, and our economy suffers shocks. These are the result of the shrinking of the world by the internet, ease of travel, and interconnectedness. Current socio-economic, geopolitical conditions, recent political agitations and upheavals in the sub-region do exert pressures on the nation in its quest to forge ahead on the cohesion, on the chosen democratic path. These are reminiscent of the 70s and 80s. Indeed, we were to have had some security meetings over the past week. We couldn't have it. And because the Minister for National Security had to travel out. It does appear that maybe this weekend or the succeeding one, we may have that meeting to really consider what to do with the imminent threat from the north. Various country resources that we have to make a choice. I guess you saw what happened last year when the attack came as close as Kulungungu. And when they did and captured some French soldiers, they unveiled the flag of ISIS. Today, the greatest fear is that we must, whatever it takes, be able to plug that leakage from the Boku corridor. They don't enter. If they do, I don't know where we'll get to. For the first time in the history of the country, last 2 weeks, we had an explosion of IEDs. these explosive devices, not made in Ghana. Where are they coming from? That's the first taste. And yet, as I'm saying, we need really to cordon off these guys, to deny them entry. Already, we are also faltering. What do? We must come together as one people. Bipartisanship. Because we must survive first before we think of development. It's a survival issue. But if you're not careful, politics will take center stage. So, colleagues, if there is anything that makes our need for a review urgent, it is one, the current economic downturn, which we know is with us. I guess we differ in the factors that have caused it, but that we are where we are, we all recognize. How do we deal with it? Does it become a survival issue as well? I guess there are at least two more reasons why this season may be the most opportune time to embark on the constitutional review. First, this is the second term of Nana Akufo-Addo-led administration, which ends 2025 January. Hence, between now and the end of 2023, presents us with a unique opportunity for such an initiative. We have a president who exits office in January 2025 after two successive tenures. An amended constitution could be his legacy, as well as offer a clean slate for his successor. Again, we've had two successful political tenures in this Fourth Republic. The NDC has come and gone twice already, and by the end of the 8th Parliament, the NPP would also have come and done two terms. That is 2 8-year terms. And in spite of the platitudes, we've not been able to revamp the economy to the desired extent. This calls for introspection and reassessment of the fulcrum around which the framework of government we have chosen revolves. We need to do this before the government begin to question the quantum and indeed the quality of the dividends of democracy that are being availed to them. Our people should not lose trust in democracy. I think that 30 years on, we should have done much, much better than we have done. The amendment procedure of the Constitution established for entrenched provisions are both tortuous and torturous, to say the least. We need to start interrogating the right interpretation of Chapter 25 of the Constitution. This should help us avoid the pitfalls of the Emeritus Professor Fiajo-led committee, what they suffered in 2020, the 2010 Constitutional Review attempt. What are the legal constraints? The Supreme Court has ruling in the Asari vs. Attorney General and must be our guide. Many of the provisions that have been identified are entrenched, and each of them shall require a referendum of yes or no. And if you are not to confuse it, even with what the CRC came with, it will take us about 20 years to deal with all of them. And that will give us another cliche. One Y, one R, 1 year, one referendum. If you're able to do that continuously for 20 years, we'll be able to deal with what has been contained in that. We can't put all of them in one basket. You confuse the voters. It's only when you have one constitution that you can have one referendum on, to have a yes or no on it. And if the new one that comes up, the overwhelming endorsement is yes, then of course the old one will cease operation. Otherwise, if you have to deal with them one after the other, I don't know how many donkey years. And I'm not too sure that we also have the resources to propel that. The sheer number of the entrenched provisions recommended by the SWL CRC, and bear in mind the provisions of Article 292, even if we wanted to amend for a year, that would be a difficult enterprise. Meanwhile, the aspirations of the people would have been stifled. With regard to the non-entrenched provisions, the amendment path is thankfully not so, it's not serenaded by the GATU, but it also requires some negotiations, even with what happened with the disassembly elections, the recommendations. I do know that there are few people who are opposed to a holistic constitutional amendment. I mean, to be realistic, some notable Ghanaians, and I believe that they are in a minority, it seems to me, have expressed the desire to maintain the status quo. For them, if it's not broken, why fix it? They hold a conservative view that the Constitution is satisfactory in the current form. I believe there are yet others, as we all do agree, who opine that the spirit of the law must guide the conduct of the polity. Ghanaians, rather, they argue, need an overhaul of their values. In other words, something more than a constitutional review. Maybe a complete transformation or to be relevant to the much acclaimed only one University of Science and Technology in this country. Prof, you didn't hear that. Perhaps we need a complete transmutation of the Ghanaians. It is a reason why it has been said in some quarters that the Constitution has not failed, but rather as a people who have failed the Constitution. We must take on board their different views. Notwithstanding, it appears to me that given the number of persons who have spoken to the issue, that the question to amend or not to amend the Constitution is no longer a relevant question. My candid opinion is that the question has long been put and the eyes had it. They have crossed the Rubicon and come to the watershed. The agenda is set. Where do we go from here? What do we want as a nation? Definitely, we cannot have everything in the Constitution codified in black and white. Is it reasonable to expect a full review? Within what time frame? Are there any legal lacunas that must be addressed? Do we have the collective political will? Who leads the charge? I propose, just as we have started today, to form an institutional partnership committee for constitutional review. That is maybe an IPC comprising all major stakeholders, especially from Parliament, to fashion the way forward. Constitutions in general do not last very long. The mean lifespan of constitutions across the world since 1789 is 17 years. Interpreted as the probability of survival at a certain age, the estimates show that 1/2 of constitutions are likely to be dead at age 18. And by age 50, only 19% of constitutions remain. So infant mortality is quite high. A large percentage, approximately 7%, do not even make it to their second birthday. So that's where we are. People say that, oh, it's too early to think up the Constitution. I disagree. The facts do not support the claim that 30 years on, we must leave the Constitution as it is. So with images of collapsing buildings in Turkey in mind, I see how much easier it is to destroy than to build. It is equally easy to find fault or identify problems. Thankfully, ours has been constructive. The work done by the CRC, the opinions expressed, as I said, beginning with Vincent Assisi through President Kufuor, Professor Mills, even Nana Dankwa Kufuor. There's hardly anyone who talks about constitutional review who does not come up with some suggestions. The harder work is in the reconstruction. But I know that we are all up to the task. We are blessed with a great human capacity as a nation and a willingness to do what is right by all of us. We also have the best practices to learn from all over the world. We have a library full of literature plus the blessings of hindsight. We cannot get it wrong. Prime Minister Winston Churchill is famously credited with saying, and I quote, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except that It is better than all those other forms of government that have been tried from time to time. But there is a broad feeling in our country that the people should rule, continuously rule, and that public opinion expressed by all constitutional means should shape, guide, and control their actions, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to end my remarks with two quotations relevant to our discourse that were pronounced last year by the President of the Republic and the Justice of the Supreme Court. During the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the 1982 Constitution on April 28, 2022, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo stated, and I quote, "On this anniversary occasion, I'm proud to say that I believe strongly in the values and principles of the Constitution that emerged from the referendum. We should never forget, though, that the Constitution is a living document, and so whenever circumstances require, we should be prepared to make the necessary amendments to it to reflect the needs of the contemporary and future times," unquote. Justice Gabriel Puaman, Justice of the Supreme Court, at the 2022 Annual Constitution Week lecture and panel discussion organized by the NCCE said, and I quote him, "There seems to be a new spirit of constitutional consciousness rising among us, the likes of which have never been experienced in this country. We need to open our ears widely to the loud whispers of this spirit and be sensitive to its guidance if we are to achieve a better quality of life for Ghanaians." Ladies and gentlemen, unquote. I guess it is the same spirit that took over Justice Puaman that has possessed us today. We'll be sensitive to the voice of Mother Ghana calling for us to affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, probity, and accountability, and to secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity. Nelson Mandela is the one who said, and I'm quoting him, "We must forever realize that the time is always right to do right," unquote. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm certain you agree with me that at this juncture, we have made a solid case for the need for a multi-party, not just a bipartisan, but a multi-party, all-inclusive, comprehensive amendment to the 1992 Constitution to reflect global trends, current realities, and future aspirations of Ghanaians. The problem with our economy are endemic and have been with us since independence. The Fourth Republican Constitution has not solved them, as it was really partly a plaster over a festering sore. It is the reason why the CRC observed boldly that the Constitution appears to be a political document, and accordingly, they sought to convert it into a developmental one. This view strengthens the need to revamp the 1992 Constitution, not merely tinker with various branches and stalks, and perhaps even the leaves. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to commend all of us here and many others who have worked behind the scenes, adding their voice to the advocacy for constitutional review. A few days after the public lecture organized by my alma mater, KNUST, last year, I met Justice Jones Doche, who said to me, "Majority Leader, I felt I was peeking through you the other day. So what is stopping us from moving forward from this rhetoric?" Having heard the extensive work done by CDD, by NCC, IEA, IDEC, and many, many others, this forum seeks to galvanize all previous efforts. The outcome of this meeting should feed into a next one planned for a group that we call the elders. And that's going to involve the former presidents, President Mahama, President Kufuor, the Speaker of Parliament, and I guess Prof. Atubiga. I guess you have to be there. And also, as I said, the Chief Justice is going to be there. After which we plan to have a national consultative meeting with a broad spectrum of stakeholders for a consensus on the way forward. We'll give it our best and hope that our efforts will be crowned with tremendous success. Let it not be said that we sat and watched and did not rise to the occasion. Posterity will be our judge. So God bless our efforts, God bless our homeland Ghana, and make it great and strong. I thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. There's not much to be said after such a delivery. Papa, I see you looking at me. I have another confession to make. I made a confession earlier when you were not here. Another one. Somebody whispered to me, Dr. Agridakom told me in confidence that as for lecturers, they can make or make. They can decide to have a lecture on Saturday morning or Saturday night. So it's 12:35 and we're supposed to have gone for lunch. But then one lecturer in our midst has decided to be true to what Doc told me. Prof says that he thinks we should start touching on the roadmap on the second part of the program. And then, depends on how it goes, we break and go for lunch and come back, or finish and go for lunch. Are we agreed? Meanwhile, there's so much out there to be enjoyed. The lady came in and said, "Oh, Mudi, I'm missing the in Timpaucho. The table is set over there, and so we are relaxed and we can have a good conversation." So, Prof. Atuguba, I'm here to graduate from your school, so have mercy on me. Please, the audience is yours.
Thank you very much, my co-moderator. Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, it's always a pleasure listening to you. All protocols observed. When you invite me, you intend that I serve it the way it is. Otherwise, you don't invite me. So having invited me, I hope you are prepared to take it. Speaking very honestly, I have identified 6 issues that have prevented the forward march of the Constitution review process. After I state them, you can make your subtractions, additions, and so forth, so that we have a set of issues that we can discuss. I think the talking has been too much, and that's why I suggested that we end the proceedings and then go for lunch, because we can talk about Constitution review forever. The time for talking is over. We need to act. What are the 6 issues? Issue number 1. From a technical point of view, is the CRC report and the accompanying white paper enough to proceed with a review of our Constitution? We are not completely all agreed on this. From a technical point of view, is the CRC report and the accompanying white paper enough to proceed with a review of the Constitution? Under this first issue, there are two sub-issues. One, should we do a bitty or a wholesale amendment? In other words, should we amend small part on voting for MNDCs, amend a small part on national development, amend a small part on powers of the president, or should we do one wholesale review? And the second subsidiary question under issue 1 is related. Should we have a one question or multiple questions referendum? So that's the first issue that's stalling progress on Constitution review. The second issue is, are we comfortable with the fact that the CRC was initiated by the NDC government? Are we comfortable with the fact that the CRC and the CRIC, that's the Constitution Review Implementation Committee, were initiated by the NDC government? The third issue is, are we comfortable with the fact that the process, the CRC process, was executive-led? In other words, it was started by the executive. The fourth issue is, how do we address civil society competitions and rivalries
over leadership and ownership of the CRC process? How do we address civil society, competition, and rivalries for leadership and ownership of the CRC process? Issue number 5. Is Parliament prepared to move in a bipartisan manner towards constitution review over and above the objections of their mother political parties? Is Parliament prepared to move in a bipartisan manner towards constitution review over and above the objections of their mother political parties? And then the final issue, are we prepared to change strategy from thinking our way into acting and start acting our way into thinking? Are we prepared to change strategy from thinking our way into acting? That's what we've been doing so far. It was necessary at the beginning to think our way into action. So we spent 12 years thinking and writing. Are we prepared now to stop that and start acting? And in the process of acting, we can continue thinking. Thinking doesn't stop when action starts. So are we prepared to change strategy and stop thinking our way into acting and start acting our way into thinking? I'll pause now for subtractions, additions to these issues before we start the discussion. Is there something we have missed? Or something we've said that needs to be varied, changed? It's not possible that this is all or stated well. Yes. Yes, please.
Prof, I was thinking that we should look at the legitimate body to kickstart the constitutional review. What is the legitimate body? And if we don't have it, how do we legitimize that? Thank you.
I hope I'm not mistaken, but that is captured under issue number 3. Partly issue number 3 and issue number 5. Issue number 3 says, are we comfortable with the fact that the CRC process has so far been executive-led? And then issue number 5 says, is Parliament prepared to move forward? Between the two, Minister.
Oh, no. I think the first point you raised is the CRC and its accompanying white paper report enough to proceed with a constitutional review. I think listening to almost every speaker, it was obvious to me that the first report really captured the major items that were really of concern, had a national consensus. There are a few issues that I'm sure has come up. But broadly speaking, the first review CRC report and its accompanying document indeed captured the essence of the weaknesses in the Constitution. And so, yes, I think that did. I think the real issues there had to do with some of the perspectives that were shared. And I think that the question you asked in the third one, which was, are we comfortable? No, how do we address? No, I think that's not the one. I think that had to do with how that report and the CRC itself was basically an executive led. To me, that is where the issues are.
Well, I think to respond to the issues that you raised, should we do maybe small amendments one at a time, or do a more holistic review and attend to it? I am inclined to go with the second one. I related to it in my own submission, that if you have to strand them out and deal with them one after the other, I don't know when you are going to be able to, and then the huge expense that would accompany it. Are we comfortable that the CRC was initiated by the NDC? What should be wrong with that? Somebody needed to start it. And I related to what Vincent Assisi said. That was the first pronouncement on whether or not we had to review the Constitution. It attracted some visceral comments at the time, because people thought that it was self-serving. But if you strip it of whatever political coloration, he drew our attention to what he thought. And he said that the proposals had come from his friends who were in the other party and not the NDC at the time. But as I'm saying, to me, that was where it started. Kufuor added to it in the last message on the State of the Nation, and so on. But I think that we need to somebody ought to start it. And that is why I'm saying that what has been done by the CRC is massive. But is it exhaustive? To be honest, I don't think so. Otherwise, we'll not be here talking about what we are talking. But it still provides us with a solid foundation to build on. How do we address the other one is whether we are comfortable that it was executive-led. We should have a buy-in from all other stakeholders. We're talking about positioning Parliament. We're talking about even consulting the constitutional creatures, Electoral Commission, NCC in particular, SHRAG, Media Commission. Let all of them come on board. We should be at the center. Yes, of course. If it has to be a bill that will exact a toll on the consolidated fund, you know where it is. So those are other considerations that may come in. But I think that it was initiated by the NDC, I don't find anything wrong with it at all. But we need to build on that. Civil society, I'm not talking about competitions and rivalries, but I'm talking about civil society involvement. Today, as we speak, IEA has invited lawyer Samakujetu to deliver a presentation on the constitutional review. They also have a whole library relating to constitutional review. We certainly will need the input from them. Professor Kosi Prembe will listen to what effort they started since their birth. We certainly need them. Let's bring everybody on board. And when it is done, if it has to maybe be Parliament to bear the brunt, I don't worry. The important thing is that we're starting something. And when the chips are down, we'll know the appropriate body to lead the effort. Is Parliament prepared to work together? The constitutional review above the position of their parties. We must get it right. You necessarily need to bring all of them together. And look, when we come to crafting bills in Parliament, the Honorable Abdallah will tell you that the executive perhaps will bring the bill, and yet when we come to doing what is called the winnowing, you always have the minority members outnumbering the majority members of Parliament in crafting the bill. Betty Moldidrisu, when she became the Attorney General, I was a minority leader. She would bring a bill to Parliament, and come and just thrust it on me. Yes, we're not beating and I will sit down to it. Today, in fact, the previous dispensation, whenever I came to doing the winnowing, the people who were helping me, the Honorable Abdullah, who is here, the Honorable Fuseni Inusa, Yile Chire, Bernard Ahiafo, and then Ayimedu. He was an occasional participant at the time. But the people who were helping were from the minority. Just as when I was in the minority, when it came to fashioning bills, everything was almost on my shoulders. So the goodwill is there. I mean, we have the president of working together, and it should be possible for us to work together. Sometimes the parties outside are overbearing, as happened in the matter that was related to by Prof. I think we can get it right with the goodwill on all sides. We certainly can get it right with the necessary transparency. If we are transparent to each other, I think we can get it right. The fifth one, are we prepared to change our strategy? If that is what is going to propel it, why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Any other comments? So you don't need to go in order. You can comment on any of the... Okay, Prof.
Well, let me say something about what I see to be the politics of this constitutional review matter. I think at the birth of the Constitution, there was a certain perception, which perception I think was somewhat formed by the kinds of politics around the whole process leading to the adoption of the Constitution or the creation of the constitutional, the committee of experts and the Constitutive Assembly and the boycott by certain sections of the professional classes and the like. That perception was that the Constitution had been made for a particular person. That person, of course, being Chairman Rawlings or later President Rawlings. So I think from that perception, there was one half of the podcast class entered the 1993, entered the Fourth Republic with a very skeptical view of the Constitution. They didn't seem to own it, and it was seen as a document belonging to another half of the podcast class. Over time, something interesting has happened, right? Which is that the one half of the podcast class that did not see itself as having given birth to the Constitution, which is the NPP, has become more glued to the Constitution as it is than the other half of the podcast class that was once seen as the midwife of the Constitution. When you look at the fact that the CRC was initiated by President Mills, for me, was not accidental. In a sense, the NDC had come to see itself as being blamed for the Constitution or whatever defects were with the Constitution. So they got to own it. They came to own it and said, okay, so if we were the ones who incubated this thing, then if there are things wrong with it, why not we also be the ones to essentially initiate the process to reform it? So they took the initiative, created a CRC and wanted to reform it. And from that time, I could see, that the party, the NPP, that had once not been really very keen about this Constitution, for some reason seemed to like it the way it is. I remember having conversations with some of the party's principals when the CIC process was ongoing and wondered why they didn't seem to be making substantial input into the process. And the response I got was that, well, there isn't really much that is broken, about the Constitution. And so, for me, when you look at the 2020 manifestos that the parties took into the Constitution, into the elections, just look at the chapters on governance. The NPP has very little to say about constitutional reform beyond election of MMDCs. And this is post the CRC report. How do I read it? I read it that it is still not too keen on constitutional reform. That's the fact. That's the way I see it. The NDC has substantially more in terms of just numbers of provisions that it thinks it would be interested to see reformed. So again, following from the spirit of the CRC, the NDC seems to be okay. We will be open to considering more things to reform. So from the get-go, I think we have to be very, very frank about this divide. That, we are at a point now where a section of the political class does not think much is broken about the Constitution, and so are not really keen about it. And then there is another portion of it that thinks that, well, maybe they don't really care if it's not reformed, but if you want to reform it, we'll come to the table and talk about it. But if you don't want the system, we are both benefiting from the broken system, so why should we care? So for me, I think, frankly speaking, that's the way I see the problem now. There is a political divergence in terms of the urgency of constitutional reform. The two parties philosophically don't see eye to eye on it. And even the one that thinks that it is willing to consider more reforms, there isn't really a lot of, the intensity of the feeling is not there. And we've gotten this from the Afrobarometer surveys, even on the election of MMDCs and the like. I also happen to have had a conversation. It was not necessarily private or confidential, but so I could divulge it. I've also had a conversation with the president early on in the tenure, when I know that he was contemplating moving on the CRC report, right? So he invited me for a conversation about that process. And, the NPP had inherited this huge document from your process and said, okay, so what should we do about this? And at the time, I think he was contemplating setting up a committee, as far as I understood him, to look into that document and propose certain, take out of that document certain things that they could move on the process going forward. I was not supportive of the idea of setting up another committee to review it. At the time, I think his suggestion was that, Professor Kumado was going to chair it, I was going to be member secretary, and then there were going to be other people, and we're going to review the thing. And I said, well, I don't really think we need another committee, right? But if you think you need one, the Attorney General is there. You could do an in-house review based on your own principles and beliefs and guidance from you as a government, and then your AG could do it. So, frankly speaking, the AG went ahead to set up a small committee, of which I was a member. It was Dame, the current AG at the time, Deputy Obiamwa, myself, two civil servants from the AG's office, and Akoto Ampao. So we were supposed to do just an in-house review, give the report to the AG, and then add advice to the president on what to do. We did have, it was a certain very informal kind of a committee, so it wasn't, and maybe that was the disadvantage of doing it the way I had proposed, as opposed to doing it the president's way, which would have been a more public committee, was that our process was very informal. We had a few meetings, and then the deputy AG, I think, sent a report. I don't know what happened with the report. So I know that there's been some attempt in the Nana-Addo administration to move on your commission's product, but it wasn't, the clear sense I got was that the president's view of the matter is that he has an appetite for very limited reform, right? And that, in his view, a lot of things can be done through parliament and some of this through standing orders, and then a number of things are not a big deal for him at all. So I really don't know how we bridge this gap between the two parties, what appears to be a gap. You know, if you look at their manifesto, clearly they are not on the same page. Even on the election of MMDCs, after the failure of the December referendum 2019, they've gone back to a position that is actually further than they were when we were involved in the process. So then NDC has gone back to almost the original, the Kwame Ahoy position and all of those things, and then the MPP is, somewhere there. So we have to be very frank about it, that if we are going to do anything, these are the gatekeepers of the amendment process, unfortunately, right? Whether it's in Parliament or the executive, the political class are the gatekeepers of this process. We don't have the Kenyan model where citizens can go and gather signatures around the country, and if you get a certain number, you can initiate an amendment process. We don't have it. We still have to go through the political class. So if they are so far apart, how do we deal with them? So yes, I like the idea of a multi-party, multi-stakeholder thing, but I think we have to seriously and frankly and very honestly figure out how to bridge this gap.
So if I may push you, so what Professor Prempe is saying basically is that the NDC has this grandiose view of constitutional reform. The MPP has a more limited view of it. The report that went to the president recommended 10 things to be amended. The CRC report, 400 and something. So there's a big guy. And the 10 things that were recommended to the president were very minor things, very, very minor things. So there's a huge gap. He suggests that we need to bridge the gap. Is that the only solution if the gap cannot be bridged? Can't you move sideways, leave the gap yawning, and move ahead? A report has been done. Why can't Parliament lead in this process?
But Parliament is populated by these two constituencies.
But we have seen a difference between Parliament's position and the position of the political party leaderships. Parliament was prepared to move. It was when they consulted outside Parliament that it stopped. So I think that we should divorce the two, and Parliament should, for once, move. Professor Buchi.
Okay. I'm grateful. Prof. Dean, moderator, Minister. I will very briefly try and see if I can propose something that responds to Prof. Moderator's worries, which Prof. Pempe has broached. I think that the major problem we have, which we have to deal with, and which very often we have glossed over, is the incentive problem of constitution reform. Machiavelli said every reformer has an enemy in the one who stands to lose from the reform. And if you don't deal with that, we are playing. It is the reason why opposition parties love reform and government parties hate reform. It is the reason why the NPP in opposition wanted reform. If you go back and play the tapes, they started talk of, in fact, Professor Mills's government was inspired by this, partly because he was provoked into it by a discussion initially by the NPP. And the NDC was forced to also then come with a position, and then when Professor Mills came into power, he started a process. So there's something about opposition parties loving reform, and the reason being, very often when in opposition, they face the heat of the poor status quo. And when in government, they realize how nice suddenly it can be. I think the incentive factor is one thing that we have to deal with. And it is a reason why members of parliament, and since we have the minister and majority leader here, we can just say it. It's a reason why members of parliament have no appetite, little to no appetite, for this amendment of majority appointment of ministers from parliament. You know, there's something about the transitory nature of parliament. Many MPs become MPs because they want to be ministers. If you take away that role, I guarantee you, the fight for parliamentary primaries will substantially go down. Many people won't be interested anymore. No, so be it, but I'm just saying there's an incentive problem that has to be dealt with. So Prof. Moderator, I would say that perhaps that's what we have to look at. The question of how do we deal with the incentive issue. Then, on the question of whether we'll present 1,000 proposals, I would respectfully just like to say that this matter can be resolved if we deal with one fundamental problem. There's a clause in the Constitution that authorizes amendment. That clause is the one that created entrenched clauses. Sometimes the way to deal with a problem is to deal with the thing that is causing the problem. And I think in this case, the thing causing the problem is the clause that created the list of entrenched clauses. So you can amend that clause to delist a certain category of clauses that shouldn't be under that clause in the first place. That will substantially water down the number of clauses that should go for referendum. Let's be honest. The reason why the framers created that tall list is because you can have members of parliament probably coming together and then changing the constitution overnight without recourse to the generality of Ghanaians. That's why they listed all those things, to ensure that you go to Ghanaians to seek help. But now that clause is entrenched. So what you do is to amend that clause by going to the people for once. The people give you the authority, you modify that clause and then limit the number of clauses that should be under that clause. But the point, I'm not saying we should do that necessarily, but I'm saying as we think about whether we'd have to go 1,000 times, whether we'd have to pose 1,000 questions, and which one is the yes applicable to, and what is it explaining of, perhaps we sometimes even forget that, let's be honest, the Ghanaian people were asked whether they liked the Constitution in 1992. One question. And that question contained 299 provisions, articles, plus transitional provisions. And the record says they said yes. We don't know whether they said yes to all the 299, or they were faced with a fait accompli, yes or no, which would also then means you are staying with the status quo, which in the opinion of some people was untenable, but they were forced to say yes. The very constitution we are worried about going to them back and forth, they had to adopt it en bloc. So I'm just thinking that we should begin to be realistic. And Professor Tukuba was on the certain panel at IDEC where he basically said, and he repeated it today, that we should stop talking. So anytime he says that, then I have to talk, then I get worried about what he may think I'm talking about. But I think that I agree that we should stop talking and start acting, but I think that sometimes we magnify the problem. And this is where I bring my statement to a close respectfully by again saying something that Professor H. Prempe and Professor Kwesari, an article they wrote, and I was then, maybe I can divulge it at this stage, but I was then engaged by CRC to respond to, and I had to respond to the article. And the article was on the legality or legitimacy of the process started by Professor Mills. Whether it is a parliamentary process, that should be it, or it should be an executive process. Both articles were published in the same journal. However, the question, frankly, and the argument I made in my response was whether it should matter. Their argument is it should matter because it creates a legitimacy problem. Perhaps it is coming to bite us now, and we can resolve it by Parliament simply adopting this. As we speak, Honourable Minister, I'm not sure Parliament has formally adopted the report, because the report could be an executive-led act, which we defended. However, the process, the legislative process, must begin and end in Parliament. And as we speak, until Parliament even adopts it, Parliament is speaking to a report which is has never been formally laid before it as a full report, apart from remnants. So I think that Parliament can deal with the legitimacy aspect of things by recognizing the report itself. That we have a report, now we will come out with a roadmap that will help us deal with the report in terms of implementation. But I think that the issue about whether we'll go and block or not, with all respect, I think we're a bit magnifying it. Because the truth of the matter is, if the experts do the work, if Parliament debates it and Parliament is accepting of the experts' work and it goes before the people, let's be honest. And I'm not saying it with any iota of disrespect to the electorate, but let's be honest. The electorates don't do the analysis we would like to pretend they do. Exactly. The electorates ask a question whether we like this or we don't. And generally, they vote according to how they vote. I'm not going to go into the detail of that. But the truth of the matter is the problem is here. And I think if we deal with the problem here in terms of refining it, fine-tuning it, and accepting the way it should go out there, Parliament does that work. And that's the reason why the constitution makers begin in Parliament. If you look at the process, it starts in Parliament by Parliament's debate and adoption, and then it goes to the people. And then it comes back to Parliament. So Parliament's job is a refinement job. The people are supposed to endorse it or refuse it, but once they endorse it, it comes back to Parliament for the refinement. And so the authority has been reposed in Parliament to clean things up. Let's rather focus on that. And I think if the issue of whether it will go in too many numbers, I think that can be resolved. But my suggestion is, if we are worried about this option, let's go to the entrenched clause itself. That can also be amended so that we delist a good number of those provisions, limit the number of clauses that should go entrenched, and then we repose the ultimate authority in Parliament to debate the rest and adopt them. And Parliament can do that without going to the people. Thank you.
Great. Some great points there. So one, we should consider amending the amendment procedure first. Two, we should consider a formal adoption of the CRC report by Parliament. And then three, we should think about the legitimacy of the executive-led process. But here, let me say something that I've always wondered. No, 99.9999% of all bills and all constitutions are executive-led. So why was the executive leading the CRC an issue? We have inherited a British system of administration where policy comes from ministries headed by a president. A policy hardly generates from Parliament. We have ministries with technical directors, and all their job is to research and develop policies. From the 1990s, we started farming those out to commissions and consultants, but it is still an executive process. In fact, it would have been a novelty for CRC to start in Parliament. I know Minister doesn't agree with me, but it never happens. Parliament never generates fresh evidence and collates it into a policy, and then by itself considers it and passes it as law. It doesn't happen. It starts from the executive, but then at a point, it is then moved to Parliament. That's exactly what happened with CRC. So I think we asked the wrong question and proceeded to answer it. Ministries are set up by executive instrument to decide policy. When they research and develop them, they take it to Cabinet for approval. When Cabinet approves it, they can pass it on to the Attorney General to draft into law. It comes back as a draft law to Cabinet for approval, and then it now moves to the table office in Parliament. At that point, Parliament's work now starts. This is how we've been doing this even before independence. The last one was the unblock voting. Okay. If you want to raise an issue as to whether we should have one question or 467 questions, you are making an assumption that the citizens are going to decide the issues in the ballot box. Again, that's a figment of our imagination. Citizens never decide whether they are going to vote yes or no in the ballot box. That decision is taken before they enter the ballot box. When the thing is debated in Parliament, when civil society is raising the issues, that's when the citizens decide. So your 467 questions will be decided before referendum day. So when they come on referendum day and they are saying yes, they are saying that on a preponderance, a balance of probabilities, I like these reforms or I don't like them. So again, we are creating a problem which doesn't exist. No citizen enters inside and says, okay, I want to see whether NECD should be voted. I want to see whether District Assembly Common Fund should be increased. No, all those decisions are taken before they enter the ballot box. Let me stop talking and then.
Well, there are 2 points that I want to make, and one has to do with, a point was made about Parliament making a decision that is quite frankly independent of the political parties. I mean, a sense that was created here. this whip system that we are operating, and we are speaking frankly, it is really not possible to make a major decision in Parliament without a strong input from the political party. There's something we call three-line whip. When there's a three-line whip, it is a whip. It doesn't matter your parliamentary decision. That position we take is the position of the political party in which ticket you went to Parliament. And so that's a very important point we have to note in making that decision. The second point has to do with a cancer we have. There's an inherent suspicion of any decision that, this talk about whether we're having this issue because it's an executive-led. It's come about because anytime one political party makes a decision, whether it's in government, the other political party inherently have suspicions. Yeah, I know, but I'm saying that it's an issue that must be dealt with. Other than that, this is always going to be an issue. And that explains why even when a party is in opposition, is advocating for something, all of a sudden he comes to power and makes the decision, the other party jumps to the other position. And so those issues are really part of this discussion we're having. And we may have to, make sure we understand it and deal with it even as we discuss these matters. Thank you.
Just a footnote. President Mills, God bless his soul, anticipated this. And again, the NDC is horrible at communication. And the NDC party, as a party, opposed the membership of the CRC because they thought it had too many non-NDC people. It was chaired by a CPP man. It had a PNC former general secretary on it. It had a founding member of the MPP on it. It had Jean Mensah on it. I happened to be part of meetings where this was being constructed, and I heard how NDC people were worried that they were giving this thing away to the opposition. And today, the MPP is suspicious of that committee, which the NDC said was too opposition. Minister, these suspicions, let's ground them on fact. After the commission finished, I just told you the composition. The CRIC, that's the Constitution Review Implementation Committee, had a founding member of the MPP in it, had a former minister appointed under Kufuor's government in it. So most of our suspicions are not based on fact. Let me be honest with you. They are based on perceptions that because an NDC government set it up, it was made up of what? NDC people. Let's check the facts.
It would appear that when it was done, then a white paper was issued, and then an implementation committee was set up. And so at what point was it brought to Parliament for adoption? I don't remember.
Actually, 2 constitution amendment bills were laid in Parliament. One for the amendment of entrenched provisions, another for the amendment of unentrenched provisions. According to constitutional requirements, they were referred to the Council of State for advice, because that's what the Constitution says. The Council of State sent them back to Parliament. Parliament sent them back to the Council of State, because at that point, people didn't want to take ownership of it. Whilst this was going on, Kweku Asare initiated a suit in the Supreme Court for the declaration that the entire CRC process was unconstitutional. And fearing that they might be held in contempt, the government stopped the process. So it did come to Parliament. Your record should reflect that.
All right, so because it came to Parliament, but it was stopped by a suit during the process. So it didn't end up because they will be in contempt. But was the suit discontinued?
No. The suit ran full term.
and ended, I believe, 2016, early 2016. And the Supreme Court decided that the process was constitutional by a 6-3 decision. At that point, the Mahama government decided that they would not continue the amendment process because of the election year, and that if they won, they will start it again in 2017.
All right.
I think, let me just attempt a clarification. There was an issue. There was an issue when it came to Parliament. If a bill should come to Parliament, how does it come to Parliament? We have processes and procedures. Now it comes, sufficient copies are made, and it's introduced in Parliament by the presentation of the paper. What happened at the time was the then Speaker, when he got it, ferried them to the Council of State straight away, and I challenged him that how do you say that it's come to Parliament? When it's not been presented to Parliament, you take ownership of it and submit it to the Council of State and pretend that the matter has come to Parliament. I challenged the Speaker that he had no locus to do what he was doing. But then, that indeed is what he did. You are aware of it. So, that's how come, that's how come we had, it was not properly before Parliament. It was not properly before Parliament. He took possession of it. And then, remember, there was some correspondence from the Council of State to us that no, that was improper. And there was another quick response to the Speaker that accepted. So that's indeed what happened. There was it met turbulent periods. And then upon that they said, okay, let's wait for a while. So that indeed, I would want to insist that the bills were never properly before Parliament because of what happened. But let me say this, the other matter that you're related to. I think that Parliament, and given the longevity of the current Speaker in Parliament, I think that we can have a way to navigate this. And I'm saying so because if we touch base with the appropriate committee, the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee, and also get a buy-in of the leadership, I believe we can make serious progress on this. The other matter, sometimes some people have some uncanny ability of bulldozing their way. But when you appear before us, the issue relating to the hybrid system, almost everybody who spoke in Parliament said that no, we've had enough. Let's now concentrate on the core responsibilities of Parliament. Let's do away with the hybrid system. It was then the then majority leader, Cletus, who stood firm and said that he will not go for any battle for the spoils to be shared by people who had not participated in the battle. So he spoke strongly. About 80% of people who spoke had indicated that no, let's do away with it. And yet your own recommendation supported what the advocate said, even though the advocate was in the minority. So really, some of the things that you did were also unreflective of the opinions of the people that we came to consult. That's chapter 1. I'll come to chapter 2. But maybe you accorded him some deference because at the time he was a majority leader.
But you know, the consultations were very wide.
Prof, I have sat and have listened carefully. What is the way forward now? What is the way forward? We know the procedure that bills are initiated by the executives. Then Parliament, upon introduction, will take over the bill. It will be referred to the appropriate committee, go through the process as stated in the Constitution. So unless and until it is officially introduced in Parliament, it is not before Parliament, and Parliament cannot commence work on it. So we need to bring the Attorney General on board so that, once the white paper is there, the report of the commission is there. They've done a great job. Propose amendments. The white paper is there. We need to kick start.
Prof, if I have your permission, I may want to commend the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs for this meeting and for the majority leader setting up a committee to go into this. I will agree with my colleague that the way forward now is the most important thing. The questions that you pose, the teasers and whatnots, I think we have to stop the political parties and whether we are prepared, because it was started by the executive. It has always, like you said, it was a wrong question. It's always started by the executive. Whether we were comfortable with the NDC-led government starting it, I think we were. And I think that even when Professor Mills was no more in the seat, I want to ask the question, what happened thereafter? We are still in the stalemate. And as of now, we haven't done anything. So far as Parliament is concerned, I agree with my colleague. We have the bill. So, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, I think now we need to get the executive agree to these proposals, and then you know how best this will come before Parliament, and then it will be referred to the appropriate committee, most likely Constitutional and Legal Committee, and then based on your guidance, we have CDD and others to assist. And I'm surprised and marveled the kind of work that had gone into this, but it's still gathering dust. So let's act now and stop everything and act and then continue thinking.
Thank you, leader and colleagues, for the opportunity. And leader, thank you sincerely for putting this program together. I think that the issue as to whether we need a constitutional amendment or not is moot. I think we've gone past that stage. I think that one of the drawbacks of this whole process is the details of the amendment. If people lament over the president having too many powers, which areas are we prepared to cut down? That, in respect of that, I think there's no agreement. If we talk about election of MMDCs, how do these MMDCs in the first place get elected? Are we going to have proposed nominees for them to be voted upon by the electorates in the various districts or municipalities? That hasn't been agreed upon. If we talk about, for instance, election of the district assembly members, should it be partisan or non-partisan? That detail has not been agreed upon. So I think that that is where the problem is also coming from, which is the reason why the journey to the constitutional amendment has been stalled up to this point. That's number one. And then number two, I also think that if we want to have a seamless process, there is no way we can have a seamless process if the political parties are not involved. Because it is the political parties that remotely control the process, at times some process within Parliament. I remember the attempt that was made at some provisions, some constitutional, provisions in the 7th Parliament. We got to a point, as leader alluded to, and the process got truncated because a political party said that
it wasn't satisfied with certain provisions of the Constitution. So we didn't realize our objective. So going forward, I'm thinking that we need to have a committee put in place. And this committee, leader gave it a certain name, but I will want to modify it and say it should be named as Constitutional Amendment Partnership Committee, which is holistic, comprehensive, comprising the executive, comprising Parliament, comprising the political parties, comprising the civil society organizations, if you like, comprising the academia. I think if we do that, the composition will be so holistic and all encompassing that everybody would have been brought on board. He makes mention of the fact that at times if a proposal is coming from a political party, the other political party becomes suspicious. That political party that is suspicious becomes suspicious, is suspicious because it's not part of the system. If a person is not part of a system, the probability or the possibility of that party not being part of the system is high. Because if you are part of the system and you are instrumental in the process of the system, I don't see the reason why you have to be suspicious about it. So I think that going forward, what we need to do is to put in place this framework that will be handling the proposals and the details of the proposals that will then realize the objective and the reason why all of us are here. So to me, this is my take on this. And I'm wondering whether constitutional league, having constituted this proposed Constitutional Amendment Partnership Committee, it will be appropriate to back it with a law. If it is backed with a law, or if it is sanctioned by a law, I think that the work of that partnership committee will not or cannot be truncated because it is backed. But I'm wondering whether legally or constitutionally that would be feasible. But that is my take on it.
Okay. So, Honorable Minister, I'm trying to get us to wrap up in 15 minutes. We've said so many critical things, but we need to summarize them, and then we'll be on the same page so that we see what the balance of issues are and how to move forward. We set off by raising some 6 issues. I'm happy to report that a lot of them have been sort of resolved. The first one was, are we okay with moving forward with the proposals of the CRC? I'm generally hearing yes, but those proposals must be subject to debate and change once it enters Parliament. Is that a position we are comfortable with? Because that's what Parliament does. Parliament is supposed to debate issues. It shouldn't be a question? Yes. No, there. When it goes to Parliament, but the reason why people are not comfortable with the CRC report is because they think that whatever is in the CRC report is what is going to pass into the Constitution. We need to disabuse people's minds about that. That once it enters Parliament, you can change the provision which says that the President can nominate ministers from Parliament if he wants. Okay. So what? Yes. So that's the first thing. I think we've come to some agreement on that. That is a basis. CRC proposals are a basis, which must then be debated, not just by Parliament, but the Ghanaian public, in the context of amendment bills. Okay. The second thing was whether we are comfortable. Yes, please.
Yes, of course. Every proposal for a law will come to Parliament in the form of a bill. And many bills come and have to be withdrawn for it to be maybe better captured. There are two things that we are talking about: entrenched, non-entrenched. To do limited amendment or a holistic amendment. Do we think that having this one would trigger further considerations that may end in a holistic amendment or holistic review? We must begin from somewhere. And if it is that, well, let this be the foundation to drive us to wherever we want to move. So be it. But as far as I'm concerned, if indeed we are limiting ourselves to the recommendations of the CRC, then we'll not even be here in the first place. We are here because people think that, yes, regardless of the work that was done, it needs real improvement. And if that will lead us to maybe perhaps even rewriting the entirety of the Constitution, so be it, because we are going to debate the principles. For instance, whether the president should have at least one half of ministers from Parliament. For instance, whether we should go even presidential or Westminster. It's all going to be part of the consideration, but we must begin from somewhere. So it is in that spirit that I will say that, yes, let it be the foundation, the driver of the amendment, whether limited or holistic.
And for the record, there are so many proposals in the CRC report that I don't agree with. So, and I'm also looking forward to making counter proposals. The second, yes, on this one. Yes.
Leader. Leader, as we speak right now, the Constitutional Review Commission's report has not been adopted by Parliament. It has not even been laid. So let it come during the debate. Oh, the executives will have to introduce it. Oh, the Attorney General can do that. Constitutional amendment. Yes.
That's the point I've been raising.
Yes.
There are so many constitutional amendments that people have come with, private members. I tell them that we can't do that.
Yes. That's a real difficulty, even because of Article 108.
Admitting those of them.
So we need to engineer that particular report to be in Parliament. Parliament will debate and adopt it. Then we start it.
So that will belong to the next steps. After we have some consensus on these issues.
I'm worried. I'm sorry about the delay. I'm sorry about the delay, but I'm worried about honorable members' approach again. Very worrying fact.
Yes.
Parliament for so long waited for the executive to move.
Yes.
And then recently Parliament has happened. Well, you have moved. That private members' bill has happened now. Hopefully this should be a private members' bill. But if we should wait for the Attorney General, government through the Attorney General to initiate this,
it might not happen.
given the look, like you say, well, hopefully so, but we don't have
But
an age.
that's why I don't want us to get distracted here, because the definite steps must be discussed and agreed. But let's resolve the issues. Our second big issue was the origins of the CRC. The NDC flavor around the commission. Have we gotten to some fair resolution of that? We have? Honorable Boa says that we haven't yet resolved the NDC flavor around the CRC report. Minister, can you help us? Okay.
No, I think the proposal made by Honorable Banda that some partnership committee made up of civil society and others may have to basically meet on your report and others and maybe clothe it with a new clothing that is not an NDC clothing. So it is going to be coming to Parliament as a very comprehensive document that has been reviewed by all these committees, including legal experts, Parliament included, and others. Maybe that probably will sound, it sounds repetitive, but it probably helps to basically deal with the issue I raised earlier, which was demystifying it and taking that suspicion and that question that was raised earlier out. If that is what will let us land it in Parliament, to me, that is it.
No, I in my own submission, if you listened, I said I was proposing that from today we form an institutional. I don't know how you want to, the physiology that you want, the nomenclature that you want. I said we should have an institutional partnership committee for constitutional review. And that will involve Parliament, maybe the committee, right? And other stakeholders, major stakeholders. You want to involve the constitutional creatures. You want to have the Attorney General. You want to have the civil society organizations, the relevant ones, all having a stake in this. And then, as you said, it will purge it of that political coloration that you are afraid of. If so to speak. But I think that, look, we must admit that yes, even though the committee did tremendous job, fantastic job, to begin us from somewhere, right? Certainly that cannot be the only matters that we should apply our minds to. A lot of things were left outside. We need to go back. And when we have done so, what should be the next stage? Is it just Parliament looking at it, that fat document, and saying that, then of course, the necessary processes and procedures will have to follow. I'm intrigued by what Professor Abuchi has just floated. To be honest, I had never considered that when you suggested that we should look at chapter 25 to effect an amendment. I think it's a very germane proposal that we have floated. Maybe you have to look at the bolts and nuts of it, and then we'll see what to do.
Majority Leader has just resolved a number of the issues. I don't know if we are following. So he's proposing that we take off this NDC dress from it and then get an embroidered dress of many colors, coat of many colors, and put it on the process. If we did that, it means that item 2, which is the NDC coloration, will be dealt with. Item 3, which is the executive-led, would also be dealt with because now Parliament is taking the lead. And item 4, which is the civil society, will also be dealt with. Because then civil society, together with the constitutional bodies, then other representatives led by Parliament would now take the lead.
Can ministers propose, majority of the ministers propose committee, the body, the partnership body? Can that body...
A coat of many colors.
A coat of many colors. Can that committee be tasked, among others, if not primarily, with the mandate of reviewing the CRC report and then making suggested recommendations for adoption so that the reviewed report together with the recommendations, when adopted, then becomes the report that will be presented to Parliament.
That's what he said.
Exactly. Because, mind you, the report that Parliament is sent is a facilitated document.
Yes.
Parliament can read the whole thing and ignore everything and go ahead with its own debate, because Parliament is supposed to decide what it is proposing for reform. It is not bound by anything. But this is just more or less like a research document, background document, extensive work that has been done, facilitating Parliament towards a certain end. So my thinking is the coloration is well understood, and now that you've made it multiple colors, once it's adopted, once the committee's work is adopted, it's no more seen as the old CRC report, but it is one that has been adopted by a group of multiple representation, bipartisan, non-partisan, everything. That's what I'm suggesting. But I think it's a good idea.
Wonderful. Great. So the last issue, Honourable Member, so that deals with your issue, because that new report would then be adopted by Parliament. The last issue is the issue where political parties put spokes in all of this that has been going on. One or other of the political parties says, yeah, we know, but 3-line whip. What happens? Cyril.
I was just going to talk about the point you made before this one, which is that the institutional partnership committee that is set up, the legitimizing that committee may require some bill or some law to put it in place. When that is done, maybe this question about once it's set up by law and it's a consultative, I don't know whether we call it consultative assembly, consultative, body with representation from political parties, organs, constitutional bodies, parliament, and everything. Once that is set up and they submit a report which will go to parliament, then you have the parties influencing or deciding, they can influence their individual members on the committee. But once there is an agreement and a report is done and is sent back to Parliament, that is what Parliament will use. So there must be some form of something to legitimize it. Which
so you're saying we should enact something like the National Reconciliation Commission Act. Yes. This one is like the Constitution Review Commission Act. Professor Prempeh. Okay. When you finish.
You see, the Constitutional Review Commission itself was established by, if my memory serves me right, CI 164 or so. So that gives it legitimacy. So if we are going to have a committee to look at the review report and present report to Parliament, then we must be thinking of doing something like that.
No, Honorable, I sort of disagree. It was set up by CI because it was executive-led. If it's going to be parliamentary-led, the closest will be an act of Parliament. Otherwise, the leadership of Parliament in it will be, yeah.
So on this issue of a committee, I'm proposing this, right? So Article 278 makes room for Parliament to actually request, right, by resolution of its members that the President appoint a committee of inquiry into any matter of public interest. In fact, this is where we would have preferred if you had done the CRC this way, because then, so what you can do in Parliament is that Parliament is a bipartisan forum. You can, and here it says the President shall appoint upon this request. It's not optional. So Parliament under 2781C can, by resolution of its members, request the President to appoint a committee of inquiry to look into any matter. Simple. You don't need an act of Parliament to do that. And then you can specify in your request, the composition. You want parties, each party to choose, bring one person, CSO to bring 2, one, military to bring 5, and it's done. So I think this is a very much easier way to do this, not go through an act of Parliament, which will require executive initiative and all of that. And you don't leave it to the President to appoint again, which would be the mistake, I think, of the CRC. Whether or not Mills chose Apia Minka or not, the MPP could have chosen Apia Minka. It's not the business of a certain president to choose the opposition party's member who sits on the committee. That was our proposal, that let the parties themselves choose who sits to represent them on this. Then they would co-own it at that point. If you do 2781C, I think it gets us where we want to be. We get a committee that is multi-stakeholder, multi-partisan. The President just is there to appoint, doesn't do anything else, just appoints, gives it the legitimacy that you are looking for, and then it can start the process of looking at the CRC report and CRIC. I usually hear CRC. What happened with the CRIC report? Is there no report?
No, there were reports, but they are not public.
But why not? Why can't we have that too?
Why could we implement something that will not come to pass? That's the
Yes.
Yeah, so I think 278C, 1C should be looked at as a better vehicle for getting this done.
Prof, I think you spoke in exactly what I was going to talk about. I was going to propose one of two things. Either that route, or if we don't want any legalities, perhaps we could just call it a consultative institutional partnership committee. It's just engaging mere consultation, a consultative. In that case, we may not require any act of parliament. So it's one of two ways. You could go that way, or in my considered opinion, to go the consultative way, which may not require any bill. But come again?
How to bring it and work product back into parliament.
Precisely. I'm saying that because it must be ferried to parliament. If it's ferried to parliament, parliament then will take a position on that. Because whether it's coming by this route or not, it must come to parliament. And parliament must take a decision on that. If a proposal comes from outside, look, anybody can bring any proposal from outside to parliament. We consider and adopt it. That could be one route that I was proposing. But I see many legal brains here. So they don't want to get it wrong. That's why they're going that route. I would have thought that the other way is also equally good. But I will yield to them. Because they are professors, I'm not a professor.
But, Minister, I was thinking that the nitty-gritties must be dealt with subsequently, not at this meeting. I think the purpose of this meeting is to come to some broad agreement. But there has to be a working group that then actualizes the agreement. The first thing that the working group has to do is to set out all the options we've discussed here for resolving each of the 6 matters, and then set out their strengths and weaknesses for consideration by the minister and the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. So I'm happy that on each of the 6 issues, we have fairly agreed on how to proceed. But actually doing it is a second step. I wish Minister were not here because we're not out, because at this point he would have to tell us what happens from now. Because I seriously want us to end before 2 o'clock and have lunch at 2. So maybe Chief Director will start speaking, and then when he comes, he would close us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. You know, Chief Director, you have to be seen but not heard. And so, in line with that spirit, I was trying to keep. But as the Minister indicated, broad-based consultation has been the approach that we have adopted. And right from inception, his contention is that, look, if you don't build that consensus, we will not get anywhere. And so this is part of the consultation. And we thought that critical stakeholders ought to be on board. That is why we sought the partnership of NCC. He personally even engaged the NCC chair on these matters, IEA and other partners. So what we are seeking to do is that after this consultation, we actually going to have some interactions with some statesmen of this country, people who have actually had the opportunity to govern, to rule, or be in some serious positions where they have had to work with this document for at least a considerable time. And so we are thinking about persons like the former President Kufuor, former President Mahama. We are thinking about the former speakers, the current speaker, and many others. That is quite a compact group that we also want to engage based on the conclusions that we actually will drive from this meeting. And then he thinks that in order to further consolidate the proposals, we may then have to touch base with some other interest groups and associations, especially those who have had some workings, to be sectorial, thematic areas, to further deepen the proposal that we have, and let them also present to us what specific proposals that they have relating to their own practice as far as those segments of the Constitution were concerned. That is the exercise that we started in 2021, for instance, for which we received a number of proposals from the Council for Law Reforms, in fact, NAT,
But we even had an engagement with the Supreme Court, and they indicated to us that, look, they ultimately, if there are constitutional issues, it will come back to them. So we should take them out and then deal with the issues. And then if there was another problem or there's any problem, they would then come in to resolve. But they had even given us the permission to use one of the appeal court judges, Professor Dennis J, to even be one of the guest speakers. So major approach will be engaging all these stakeholders and also giving the opportunity to others, touching base with civil society organizations, Ghana Medical Association, and all of that, and NAT, and so on and so forth, to be able to consolidate the proposals. That's the approach the minister is adopting, and that is what is it that we're going to work with. I mean, that's why we wanted to seek your candid advice on these matters.
So Minister is back.
Yes.
I was just telling them that since we have a fair agreement on the key issues, the key next step is for you to have communicate to us your vision for the process going forward, because the nitty-gritties of what we have agreed need to be worked out. Broad agreement is different from working it out and getting it into action. So if you don't mind, Minister, I'll let Minority Leader have his final words, and then you give us the closing remarks showing the way forward.
Well, thank you very much. I think, first of all, let me thank...
Since when our two elders speak, that's it. Can I have 1 minute? Chip in. Because of something... I'm sorry. Because of something Chip said. I am a bit worried about the danger of another extensive consultative process. And I'm just chipping this in as the final words because I can come back on that. I'm a bit worried about that because of the danger of repeating CRC. Our worry here with CRC is mainly in the coat of colors, which we are trying to change. I don't think the substance has been questioned in some ways. Minister has indicated there are gaps to be filled, but not question marks about substantive things. So my worry is about going back to some key representative groups. And I'm speaking as someone who was aware that these groups were consulted. There's a danger that we may do it again. And the real danger for me now is the prospect, therefore, of this eating into 2025. Now, once we get into another regime, that regime would have tasted, forgive the expression, tasted blood. And would probably want to also now have a bit of that taste before the incentive problem again, before, let me get to the tail end before we do something about it. I think if for nothing at all, we are at the tail end of an administration that can't be repeated. Even if the same political party, it is not the same administration. So this is perhaps one of the greatest times. And Honorable Minister, from the way he was speaking, I get the sense that, I don't know, he said he's wishing them well. I don't know whether he's coming back as another Mugabe. But clearly, if it's not, in other words, we have an opportunity by certain variables that we may not get 2025 moving forward. Our targets should be coextensive with the 2024 elections. If that target is met or should be met, I think an extensive consultative process could be exactly our undoing. So I would want to beg, as the last words are being said in that regard, that I would wish we have that at the back of our minds as we think about this, respectfully.
Well, first of all, let me thank all of you for your time. Let me thank the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs for putting this meeting together. I think the proposals and the suggestions are very, very, very comprehensive enough for us to start. And I think I want to add to what you just said. The key here is that we found a strategy that is going to get us a document to hand over to Parliament that will be Ghanaian in nature and not be clothed with an executive or an NDC document. That's the whole strategy right now. So by the time Parliament gets this document, it will have been a document that has come from the consultative group. That key strategy is very important because once Parliament has this document, Parliament, before it passes any law, is going to go through the whole parliamentary process of engaging the whole of Ghana, taking things out based on the how we do and how we pass every law. So I think that point is very important. We must avoid the danger of starting a new committee as a consultative group. I am sure that all the stakeholders are coming with a lot of different ideas, representing a lot of different ideas. And once we keep it there, it will get to Parliament, having cured all the questions that have been asked. Then we get it in Parliament. I believe that is how we can go. And I think in doing that, we must be mindful of the political parties as well in this consultative group. Because as I pointed out, one of the most important hurdles I see is to make sure that by the time it gets to Parliament, the buy-in of the political parties are also important. Because other than that, by the time it gets to Parliament, the political parties will now be coming in with their trail whip to redirect us back. That's something we should avoid. But having said that, I believe that we have a strategy going forward. And thank you very much.
Final words.
Yes. From the, how do you call him? I will call him the Mugabe in Parliament, but I'm not supposed to say it. The leader of Parliament.
The Mugabe description is really very derogatory. He's not a known Democrat. He's not a known Democrat. I do characterize me as Mugabe. Very derogatory. But having said so, I think I must also add my voice to show appreciation to all of us here assembled for being here in the first place and also the contributions that you've made. I think we're getting somewhere. As far as I'm concerned, the major takeaway is the admission that we have a foundation, which is the CRC report, but it's not enough. How do we review it and add to or subtract from that? And I think that because we want to make this a one-stop matter, we should aim at a comprehensive review of it. What vehicle to use is the partnership group that we're talking about, from the major stakeholders, as I did indicate, from Parliament, from the judiciary, from even the executive, as far as I'm concerned, represented by maybe the Attorney General, the constitutional creatures. I've always said that one thing that could send all of us plummeting is the performance of the work of the Electoral Commission. And I remember when we had to switch from Afarijan to Charlotte Osei, I approached Ajaho, who was then Speaker, and said, look, let's find a way to compel the President to come to Parliament. If we have to quickly amend the provision on the Electoral Commission to have Parliament maybe approve of the nomination by an absolute majority, 2/3 majority, let's do it. Ajaho prevaricated a bit and said, oh, it's a good proposal, but let's go and think about it. It was the following day when I went there, when he reminded, but have you considered that it's an entrenched provision? And nothing could be done about it. But to me, he understood where we were. So I'm just saying that let's be consultative of all these. We could have representatives from the Electoral Commission, from NCC, from SHRAG, Media Commission also complaining, the Auditor General. It's only you send your you declare your assets to the Electoral Commission, to the Auditor General. What does it do with it? Why do you even deposit with the Auditor General? It's supposed to interrogate it to ensure that you are compliant with all your responsibilities, including paying your taxes. Here in Ghana, nothing is done. You submit it to the Auditor General, and that's the end. Unless maybe any matter arises. Otherwise, is there eternity? In the meantime, somebody entering public office could indicate that he owns 10 houses when he owns only one house. What it means is that he aspires to own 10 houses. And then he goes into that office. At the time of his exit, he has 10 houses indeed. Right? But I made a declaration, a 1992 declaration. You are faulting me now. So let's bring all these people. And then what we have to do, though, is to define a roadmap, what to do. Because I do know that this parliament is in existence until this first meeting is lasting till the end of March, 31st March. And then Parliament would proceed on the Easter break, because the next succeeding Friday, April 7th, is Good Friday. So we may have to adjourn on 31st of March. Maybe worst case scenario to go to maybe 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th of March, maybe the Monday, Tuesday. Otherwise, 31st March. We adjourn, and the next matter that we take over the country is the NDC primaries in May. It's going to take public space. May, so I'm looking at us maybe perhaps giving, once we put the committee together, giving them up to, say, June. Parliament will be back. Because when we come, we are even not able to handle it June, July. The next time is October, November, December. October is the district level elections. And November, December is budget. They are budget months. That will also take the steam from it. So let's have this at the back of our minds, and then once we put the group together, and maybe we'll touch base with the various groups immediately. The next 2 weeks or so to come with a determination who to constitute the group, and then we entrust them with the responsibility that we are charged with. So with that, I thank you once again, and the moderator will bring the curtain down.
Nothing more to add. The Honourable Minister has said it all. Within 2 weeks, we'll hear back from them about the constitution of this body. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful panel for moderation.